Chapter 33:10. I want revenge. I wonder how Jing Yue is. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he immediately took out the 9 extreme. He informed Nie Fenghua, Jun Ouching, and the others and immediately entered the 9 extreme. Nie Tian. In the 9 extreme, Hua Yiru saw Nie Tian appear and immediately walked over, but his face was a little uneasy. Elder Hua, is Jing Yue all right? Nie Tian went forward and saw that Jing Yue was still in the formation, fusing with the Sky Evolution Saint Spirit. However, her face was very ugly and as pale as paper. Her whole body was covered in cold sweat that soaked her clothes. Her condition is not very good. The fusion with the Sky Evolution Saint Spirit is not going well. She has consumed a lot of blood chi before, and now her blood chi is insufficient, causing her aura to be very unstable. Hua Yiru looked at Nie Tian and said in a deep voice, "Yes." Nie Tian nodded with an ugly expression. Nie Tian, you can't help her now. Whether or not she can successfully fuse with the Sky Evolution Saint Spirit depends on whether her will is strong enough. Hua Yiru looked at Nie Tian and said with a gloomy face, "That's not necessarily true. If she is in the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin, she can easily fuse with the Sky Evolution Saint Spirit with the help of the Blood Yuan power in the coffin." At this time, the Ghost Emperor's voice sounded and said to Nie Tian, "Let Jing Yue enter the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin to cultivate now." Nie Tian frowned and couldn't help but be surprised. "Yes." The Ghost Emperor nodded and said, "The Blood Yuan power in the Sky Evolution Saint Spirit and the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin come from the same warrior. When fusing with the Sky Evolution Saint Spirit, it will be more beneficial to absorb the Blood Yuan power in the coffin." "All right." Nie Tian's eyes flickered. After agreeing, he directly left the 9 extreme and put the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin into the 9 extreme. "Nie Tian, what is this?" Hua Yiru saw the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin and asked in surprise. "Ghost Valley Emperor coffin." Nie Tian smiled faintly and briefly explained the origin of the Emperor coffin. So in the Emperor tablet, other than the Sky Evolution Saint Soul, there's also the Ghost Valley Emperor coffin. After listening to Nie Tian's words, Hua Yiru could not help but tremble as he said with a shocked expression. Then, without hesitation, Nie Tian placed Jing Yue and the great formation around her into the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin. After that, he nervously sensed Jing Yue's aura, fearing that something might happen to her. Fortunately, after a while, Jing Yue's aura stabilized and her complexion began to improve. Her martial body returned to normal. Phew! Nie Tian let out a long breath of turbid air. His tense face relaxed a lot. "Nie Tian, thank you." At this time, a woman walked over. Her body was weak and frail. She bowed slightly towards Nie Tian. "Auntie is too polite. This is what I should do." Of course, Nie Tian recognized that the woman in front of him was Jing Yue's mother, Ghost Valley Rumling. He quickly supported the latter and said with a faint smile. Ghost Valley Rumling nodded slightly and did not say anything else. If it was not for Nie Tian, she could not imagine what she and Jing Yue would have experienced today. "Ghost Emperor, how long will it take for Jing Yue to fuse with the Sky Evolution Saint Soul?" Nie Tian looked at Jing Yue in the Ghost Valley Emperor's coffin and asked in a deep voice. "It doesn't take too long to fuse with the Sky Evolution Saint Soul. The most important thing is that she needs to absorb the blood origin power in the Emperor's coffin. With her current martial body, while absorbing the blood origin power, her martial body needs a slow acceptance process." The Ghost Emperor's eyes lit up as he said, "According to my guess, it will take her several years to dozens of years to completely absorb the blood origin power in the Emperor's coffin." "So long." Nie Tian could not help but frown when he heard the Ghost Emperor's words. He did not expect that Jing Yue would take so long to absorb the blood origin power in the Emperor's coffin. The Emperor's coffin contains the blood origin power of 2 Saint Pinnacle powerhouses. The Ghost Emperor's gaze sharpened as he said, "That little girl is merely a demi-saint, and the only reason she could absorb so much blood origin energy in such a short time was because she was a member of the Phantom Valley clan. If it were other martial artists, they would need hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of years to absorb such a powerful blood origin power. The corner of Nie Tion's mouth twitched a little as he nodded. A few decades was indeed a little long for Nie Tion. However, for godly martial artists, a few decades was just a blink of an eye. It should be noted that many martial artists would go into seclusion for hundreds or even thousands of years. Ghost Emperor, how powerful will Jing Yue be after she absorbs the blood origin power? Then, Nie Tion's eyes flashed with a hint of passion as he could not help but ask. She will definitely be a saint. As for what realm of saint she will reach, I can't say for sure. The Ghost Emperor smiled and said, Ghost Emperor, there are strong and weak saints. If that's the case, then the saint realm should also be divided into realms, right? Nie Tion's eyes narrowed as he suddenly asked. Although he had never been to the Holy Realm, he had seen more than one saint. Not long ago in the Tianqing realm, the Ghost Lord and the Lord of 10,000 Ghosts were clearly not saint martial artists of the same level. That was why Nie Tion guessed that there would be differences in strength even among saints, and that the saint realm should have different realms. Of course there are. The Ghost Emperor smiled, but did not elaborate. But it's useless for you to know that now. It won't be too late to learn about it when you truly enter the Holy Realm. All right. Nie Tion's face stiffened, and he could only nod. Knowing about the Saint Realm too early would not benefit him. He still had many unfinished business in the realms, and he would naturally go to the Holy Realm once he was done. He would definitely avenge Star Monarch Earth Destroyer, Xiahou Yao. After making arrangements for Jing Yue, Nie Tion and the rest left the 9 extremities. Today's battle had ended with Kuyo Onaguchi's death, and the grudge between him and Nie Fenghua and Nie Tion had come to an end. However, another powerful force, the 9 mystical sect, was dragged into the limelight. Nie Tion had killed the 9 mystical sect's Emperor Jiuxian, so the 9 mystical sect would definitely not let him off. Furthermore, Jun Aoqing had almost died in the hands of the heavenly evil monarch, so Nie Tion would definitely not let the 9 mystical sect off. It wouldn't be long before Nie Tion stepped into the 9 mystical sect and annihilated the 9 mystical sect. Nie Tion, I want revenge. At this moment, Jun Aoqing suddenly walked over with a chill in her eyes. Teacher was killed by them. I want revenge. Looking at Jun Aoqing, Nie Tion immediately reacted with killing intent surging in his eyes. Grandma Tang. When Jun Aoqing came to the Saint Soul Academy, she became the disciple of one of the 3 elders, Grandma Tang. But not long ago, Grandma Tang was killed by the Ghost Valley's 7 calamities to protect Jun Aoqing. Nie Tion, I want to increase my strength. I want to take revenge for my teacher and my clansmen. Jun Aoqing took a step forward and looked at Nie Tion with a burning gaze. Terrifying killing intent surged in her beautiful eyes. She might not have known Grandma Tang for long, but they had a master-disciple relationship. Furthermore, Grandma Tang died to protect her, so she had to take revenge for Grandma Tang. Furthermore, the Ghost Valley's 7 calamities even mentioned to her that the Netherworld Empire's destruction was planned by the heavenly evil monarch. The enmity between Jun Aoqing, the heavenly evil monarch, and the 9 mystical sect was irreconcilable. Chapter 33:11. Chapter 33:06. Battle in the Sky, Aoqing. Nie Tion looked at Jun Aoqing. Sensing the hatred and killing intent in her eyes, he couldn't help but tremble. It was his negligence that led to Jun Aoqing's capture and Granny Tang's tragic death. He blamed himself very much. Nie Tion, you can't be by my side all the time. I need to become stronger. Jun Aoqing's eyes were filled with sharpness as she said in a deep voice. Nie Tion nodded. What Jun Aoqing said was exactly what he was thinking. He had too many burdens on his shoulders. It would not be good to bring Jun Aoqing with him all the time. Sometimes, he could not even guarantee his own safety. How could he protect others? The only way to protect Jun Aoqing was to make her stronger. June Ouching was only at the ninth stage half-sage realm. The gap between her and Nie Tian was getting bigger and bigger. Given June Ouching's age, she was already considered a monster to have such strength. However, the enemy she was facing was too strong. She had to become stronger quickly. Heaven and Earth Saint Rune. At this moment, Nie Tian suddenly thought of the Saint Origin Blood Jade. Not long ago, when he had been in the heavenly Xing realm, he had absorbed the power that had erupted from the awakening of the Heaven and Earth Saint veins, which had helped him unlock a saint pattern. Originally, he wanted to save this Heaven and Earth Saint rune for when he was breaking through to the Sage realm. But now, it was more suitable to give it to June Ouching. With June Ouching's current strength, it should not take long for her to absorb the Heaven and Earth Saint rune. After absorbing the Heaven and Earth Saint rune, even if she could not directly break through to the Sage realm, she would at least reach the ninth stage pseudo-Sage realm. Nie Tian, with June Ouching's current strength, directly fusing with the power of the Heaven and Earth Saint runes, will have a huge impact on her martial body. She will suffer a bit. The Ghost Emperor guessed what Nie Tian was going to do and said solemnly, "Any martial artist has to pay a price if they want to increase their strength. I believe that June Ouching can bear this kind of pain." Nie Tian's eyes flickered slightly, releasing a blazing light as he spoke in a heavy tone. "Yes." The Ghost Emperor nodded and said, "Right now, June Ouching's desire for revenge is very strong. It might not be a bad thing for her to fuse with the Saint Rune of Heaven and Earth." Nie Tian nodded and made his decision. He would let June Ouching merge with the Heaven and Earth Saint runes. Then, Nie Tian told June Ouching about the Heaven and Earth Saint runes. "For the sake of revenge, I can bear any pain." June Ouching nodded after listening to Nie Tian. Next, Nie Tian made some preparations and handed the Sacred Origin Blood Jade to June Ouching. He let the latter enter the 9 extremities and start absorbing the Heaven and Earth Saint runes. Nie Tian didn't know how long it would take for June Ouching to finish fusing with the Heaven and Earth Saint runes, but June Ouching was temporarily safe in the 9 extremities. "Old Hua, what are your next plans?" At this time, Nie Tian looked at Hua Yiru and sensed the aura in the latter's body. At this time, Hua Yiru had already recovered a lot. His aura had stabilized and the wounds on his martial body had completely healed. After several transformations, the 9 extremities had gradually begun to transition into a sacred realm. It shouldn't be long before it became a true sacred realm. Hua Yiru was able to recover so quickly because he had absorbed the power of the 9 extremities. "Nie Tian, this is all I can do for you at the moment. Next, I have an appointment to keep." Hua Yiru looked at Nie Tian and smiled faintly. "An appointment?" Nie Tian was stunned. He wanted to ask Hua Yiru what appointment he was going to keep. "Don't worry, we will meet again in the future." Hua Yiru didn't want to say so much and just smiled. "Okay." Nie Tian nodded. He didn't want to ask anymore. Then, Hua Yiru left with Gue Gu Rumung and quickly disappeared. Hua Yiru first sent Gue Gu Rumung back to the Holy Moon Empire and then went to keep the appointment. "Old Hua, the next time we meet, I won't let you down." Nie Tian looked in the direction where Hua Yiru had disappeared. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly as he thought to himself. He had a feeling that the next time he saw Hua Yiru would probably be after he entered the Sacred Realm. There should be some kind of connection between the Star's Sacred Lord and the Star Envoy, so he was not worried that he would lose news of Hua Yiru. Hua Yiru's departure made Nie Tian feel slightly disappointed. "Nie Tian, are you all right?" At this moment, Nie Fenghua walked over and asked Nie Tian. "Father, I'm fine." Nie Tian smiled faintly and nodded. Although he had been severely injured previously, he was gradually recovering at this moment. However, at this moment, Nie Fenghua's body trembled and he spat out a mouthful of blood. "Father!" Seeing this, Nie Tian's expression changed, and he hurriedly went up to support Nie Fenghua. "I'm fine. This is the backlash after activating the sword seal." Nie Fenghua's face was pale as he said with a bitter smile. Nie Tian sensed the aura in Nie Fenghua's body and found that there was an extremely violent power in the latter's martial body. It was extremely terrifying. "Father, what's going on with the sword seal in your body?" Nie Tian asked with a frown. Nie Tian had already sensed that there was a powerful sword seal in Nie Fenghua's body. He had always thought that this sword seal was left behind by Eternally Merciless and was Nie Fenghua's trump card. However, after activating the sword seal, he discovered that the sword seal's aura was completely different from Eternally Merciless sword intent. Without a doubt, this sword seal was not left behind by Eternally Merciless. Nie Tian felt that the sword seal in Nie Fenghua's body seemed to be even more powerful than Eternally Merciless sword intent. He was very curious about where this sword seal came from. Nie Tian, this sword seal came from a powerful sword martial space. That world is called the Sky Sword Martial. Nie Fenghua looked at Nie Tian and said in a deep voice, "Clear Sky Sword Martial." When Nie Tian heard this strange name, he couldn't help but narrow his eyes, feeling a little strange. It sounded like a world of swords. As for what the Sky Sword Martial was, it was hard to guess. Sky Sword Martial is a world of its own. Eternally Merciless, me, and another swordsman, Bailey Xingxue, have all cultivated in that world. Nie Fenghua's eyes were gloomy as he said, "It can be said that the three of us have such powerful achievements in the Sword Dao because of the Sky Sword Martial." Bailey Xingxue. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed when he heard this name. Bailey Xingxue and Eternally Merciless and Nie Fenghua knew each other. It turned out that the three of them had cultivated in the same world. At this time, Nie Tian was even more curious about this world called the Sky Sword Martial. Chapter 33:12. Chapter 33:07. Entering the Sky. I could go to the Sky Sword Martial Arts? Nie Tian looked at Nie Fenghua and asked in astonishment. He really wanted to go to the Sky Sword Martial Arts and see what the world that could make Eternally Merciless so terrifying was like. But he knew that the Sky Sword Martial Arts was not something that could be easily entered. Otherwise, that world would definitely be crowded by swordsmen. Nie Fenghua told him that Eternally Merciless said that the time for him to enter the Sky Sword Martial Arts had come. It sounded like Eternally Merciless had a very high status in the Sky Sword Martial Arts. Nie Tian, actually, Eternally Merciless wanted you to enter the Sky Sword Martial Arts a long time ago, but I kept stopping you. So, until now, you have not been able to enter the Sky Sword Martial Arts, Nie Fenghua said solemnly as she looked at Nie Tian. Why? Nie Tian was stunned. He was very confused. Why did Nie Fenghua want to stop him from entering the Sky Sword Martial Arts? Since the Sky Sword Martial Arts could produce swordsmen like Eternally Merciless, Nie Fenghua, and Bailey Xingxue, it should be a very good place to go. Why did she want to stop him? Could it be that the Sky Sword Martial Arts had some secrets? Nie Tian, the Clear Sky Sword Martial technique doesn't belong to the Myriad Realms. It's a mysterious world, and it's connected to more than just the Myriad Realms. Nie Fenghua frowned and said with a gloomy face, "What do you mean?" Nie Tian was stunned and couldn't help but feel puzzled. Domain system. This was the first time he had heard of this name. The so-called realm system is a system of realms that are connected together to form a realm system. For example, the Myriad Domains is a domain system. Nie Fenghua already knew that Nie Tian would be puzzled. She explained, generally speaking, there will be many domain systems under a sacred world, existing around the sacred world. It's like a realm. There are many planes of existence beneath it. So that's how it is. When Nie Tian heard Nie Fenghua's words, he couldn't help but be surprised. He had guessed that there might be more realms than just 10,000 realms. As it turned out, the Myriad Domain was only a system of domains, and there were many systems of domains like the Myriad Domain below the Saint's World. The Sword Martial in the Sky is not only connected to the Myriad Domains, but is also connected to other domains and even some low-level sacred worlds. Therefore, after you enter the Sky Sword Martial, you will not only encounter swordsmen from the Myriad Domain, but also swordsmen from other domains, and even some swordsmen from the sacred world, Nie Fenghua said solemnly. Father, are you worried that I won't be able to compete with these swordsmen, so you don't want me to enter the sky sword martial arts too early? Nia Tian asked with a faint smile. This is just one of the reasons. Nia Fenghua nodded, but his face became even gloomier. He said, there's another more important reason. Swordsmen who enter the sky sword martial are not allowed to leave easily, unless your sword principle reaches the requirements of the Guardian of the Sky. Guardian of the Sky? When Yetian heard this name, he couldn't help but be stunned. He asked doubtfully, who is that? The Guardian of the Sky, as the name suggests, is the person who guards the sword martial in the sky. There are a total of 7 guardians in the sky sword martial, and Eternally Merciless is one of them. Nia Fenghua's eyes flickered, and he said, actually, Eternally Merciless strength is far greater than what you see. Every time he enters the myriad domain, he will set up seals in his body to suppress the sword intent. This, Nia Tian was stunned for a moment, and his face was filled with astonishment. In his opinion, Eternally Merciless was already extremely terrifying, but he didn't expect that the real Eternally Merciless was even more terrifying. Eternally Merciless sealed his own sword intent, and it was obvious that he didn't want his strength to be too conspicuous. Father, what are the requirements of the Guardian of the Sky for swordsmen? What realm must the swordsman reach before they are allowed to leave the sky sword martial arts? Nia Tian frowned and asked in a deep voice. He was worried about Mo Rushi, who was about to give birth soon, so he didn't have much time. If he had to spend a few years in the sky sword martial arts, he would rather not enter. Every sky guardian's requirements are different, but if you want to leave the sky sword martial arts, you must defeat one of the 6 great sky sword slaves. Nie Fenghua's eyes flickered with a peculiar light as he said, the 6 great sky sword slaves are second only to the guardian of the sky sword martial arts. They are responsible for guarding the sky sword martial arts, and every swordsman who wants to leave the sky sword martial arts must obtain their permission. Father, when you left, you also defeated a sword slave in the sky, right? Nie Tian couldn't help asking when he saw the flickering in Nie Fenghua's eyes. No. Nie Fenghua shook his head and said, I have challenged the 6 great sword slaves countless times, but any one of them is far stronger than me. The few times I left the sky sword martial arts, it was because Eternally Merciless personally interceded with the sword slaves and the sky sword slaves that they let me leave. But every time I left, the sword slaves and the sky sword martial arts would leave a sword seal in my body to ensure my return. So the sword seal in Father's body was left by the sword slaves in the sky sword martial arts. Nie Tian knitted his brows. Yeah. Nie Fenghua nodded his head and said, the most talented swordsmen from various domains are gathered in the sky sword martial arts. You should go and meet them. Furthermore, the sword seal in the sky will reappear in a month. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for any swordsman, so you should go. The sword seal in the sky. Nie Tian's eyes couldn't help burning with yearning. After pondering over it, he finally nodded his head. The sky sword martial arts was too attractive. Nie Tian planned to return from the sky sword martial arts in 3 months at most. Since Eternally Merciless let Nie Fenghua go, then he could also let Nie Tian go. Moreover, Bailey Shengshue's strength might not be above Nie Fenghua's, but didn't he also leave the sky sword martial arts? Following that, Nie Tian asked Boundless Ghost to head to the 9 regions Wind and Cloud Alliance to look after the Nie family. Nie Tian was worried that the Dark Knight might harass the Wind and Cloud Alliance again. After Boundless Ghost Desolate agreed, he immediately left. Nie Fenghua and Nie Tian immediately headed to the sky sword martial arts. 3 days later, Nie Fenghua and Nie Tian arrived at a place high up in the sky of the Sacred Spirit region. Dark clouds rolled in the surrounding space, and astral winds howled. A space-time crack appeared, and a huge pitch-black eye appeared in the void. Nie Tian, that space-time fissure is the Saint Soul region's entrance to the clear sky sword martial technique. Nie Fenghua pointed at the space-time fissure and said. Then, her figure moved, and she flew over. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't expect that this terrifying space-time crack was the entrance to the Sky Sword martial arts. The two figures entered the space-time crack and disappeared. In the next moment, Nietian arrived at a strange world. The surrounding space was filled with an extremely strong aura of sword intent. It was incomparably sharp, and it made one's blood boil. Nietian's eyes burned with desire as he looked up into the sky. To his surprise, there was a gigantic sword floating in the air. It looked like an upside-down mountain peak that pierced into the heavens. It was over 10,000 meters long and gave off an ancient, boundless, vigorous, and desolate feeling. At this moment, in another place high up in the sky, two figures stood facing each other. It was obvious that they were going to fight. One of the figures made Nietian's eyes widen, and he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. "Nietian, do you know that person?" Nie Fenghua couldn't help but frown when she saw Nietian's reaction. "Yes." Nietian nodded his head heavily, and his eyes emitted a sharp light. He locked onto that figure and said, "He's my friend, Emo Qianjun." Chapter 33:13. Limitless Sword, Saint Emo Qianjun. Nietian's eyes trembled as he stared at the figure in the sky. He couldn't believe that it was actually Emo Qianjun. Back when he had been in the god domain of the heaven world, Nietan Emo Qianjun, the limitless sword saint, Jiu Qiansheng, the sword monarch of the western domain, Goskar, the sword ruler of the North Sea, and Duguanai, the evil swordsman of the East River, were known as the 5 strongest sword cultivators in the heaven world. Later on, all 5 of them had entered the realm. However, Duguanai had been killed by Nietian not long after entering the realm. QL11, after Guehen had entered the realm, Nietian had encountered him once, but there had been no news of him after that. Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng had briefly joined the Crimson Moon Divine Palace after entering the realm. Later on, the Crimson Moon Divine Palace's master, Qi Yefeng, had harbored ill intentions towards them, forcing them to leave the Divine Palace. Although it had been a long time, it was still vivid in his mind. However, the moment Nietian saw Mo Qianjun, he felt as though the blue sea had turned into mulberry fields. Reuniting with an old friend felt like a lifetime had passed. No wonder there hadn't been any news of Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng after Nietian left. It turned out that Mo Qianjun had come to the Sky Sword Martial. Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng had left together, so they shouldn't have been separated. If Mo Qianjun was here, then Jiu Qiansheng should be here too. Reuniting with a friend who had gone through life and death for so long made Nietian's heart tremble. He couldn't help but feel a surge of warmth as his eyes shone with a blazing light. "Nietian, is that swordsman very important to you?" Nie Fenghua couldn't help but ask when she saw Nietian's reaction. "Yes." Nietian nodded. "Back when I was in the realm, Mo Qianjun and I were sworn brothers. So that's how it is." Nie Fenghua nodded, but her eyes were clearly filled with worry. "Father, let's go take a look." Nietian smiled faintly. His figure moved and flew toward the sky. Nie Fenghua hurriedly followed. Nietian and Nie Fenghua came to the crowd below and looked up at the two figures in the sky. Nietian's eyes naturally focused on Mo Qianjun. Feeling Mo Qianjun's aura, his eyes couldn't help but heat up, and he exclaimed in surprise. He could sense that Mo Qianjun's strength had already reached the 5th grade pseudo-sacred realm, and his mastery of the sword Dao had reached the ultimate godly sword flesh. Nietian was very surprised by his strength. Especially Mo Qianjun's sword Dao realm, it simply shocked Nietian. One had to know that Nietian's current sword Dao realm was only at the transcendent sword soul, which was even weaker than Mo Qianjun's. However, Nietian could use the power of the Sky Evolution Saint Soul to force his sword Dao realm to the transcendent sword body realm. It seemed that Mo Qianjun had come to the Sky Sword Martial a long time ago. Otherwise, his strength would not be so strong. As soon as Nietian came to the Sky Sword Martial, he felt that the space in this world was filled with a very strong aura of sword intent, which was especially suitable for swordsmen to cultivate. Therefore, it was not surprising that Mo Qianjuan's sword Dao realm had reached the ultimate godly sword body realm. Mo Qianjun, you little swordfish, you actually dare to challenge this 100 swords? Are you tired of living? At this moment, the person opposing Mo Qianjun roared in an incomparably arrogant manner. Boom! As his voice fell, a terrifying aura erupted from his body, and rays of sword intent were released, like thousands of sharp blades striking the void, extremely sharp. Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. This swordsman was very young, but his strength had reached the 9th grade pseudo-sacred realm, and his sword Dao realm had reached the ultimate godly sword body realm. The sword intent released from this person was extremely terrifying, like a ferocious wild beast. This person is so strong. Brother Mo is no match for him. Tian's face darkened as his lips curled up coldly. He thought to himself, Brother Mo is a calm person who doesn't compete with others. Why did you challenge this person? Mo Qianjuan's character was relatively indifferent. There must be a reason why he challenged someone with such a great disparity in strength. Moreover, Tian was very confused as to why the swordsman called Mo Qianjun a swordfish. Make your move. Mo Qianjun stood coldly in the void. His eyes were extremely firm, and, at the same time, extremely sharp and murderous. Tian was stunned again when he sensed Mo Qianjuan's murderous intent. He knew Mo Qianjun very well, and the latter was a very calm person. What did that person do to make Mo Qianjun so angry and murderous? At this moment, the crowd couldn't help but burst into laughter when they saw Mo Qianjun. This swordfish has been in the Sky Sword Marshal for more than 10 years, but he's still a swordfish. What a piece of trash. Trash swordfish. How dare he challenge his own 100 swords? Isn't he courting death? It's just a swordfish. It doesn't matter if he dies. Anyway, who knows how many swordfish die in the Sky Sword Marshal every day? The crowd discussed among themselves, and they looked at Mo Qianjun with undisguised contempt. Tian couldn't help but look at Nye Fenghua when he heard the crowd's words. He transmitted his voice and asked, Father, what do they mean by swordfish and 100 swords? The swordsmen in the Sky Sword Marshal are divided into 6 levels. Nye Fenghua frowned slightly and hesitated for a moment before he said, The weakest is the swordfish. From the weakest to the strongest, they are 10 swords, 100 swords, 1,000 swords, Wan Jian, and Sky. Generally speaking, the 10 swords manage the swordfish, the 100 swords manage the 10 swords, the 1,000 sword manage the 100 swords, the Wan Jian manages the 1,000 swords, and the Sky manages the Wan Jian. The 6 sword slaves in the sky that I told you about are the 6 swordsmen in the Sky Sword Marshal. They are the most powerful beings apart from the guardians of the sky. So that's how it is. Tian narrowed his eyes as a cold light shone in them. It seemed that the Sky Sword Marshal was similar to the slave market. The so-called 100 swords and 1,000 swords were similar to the centurions and chiliarchs. Moving from a swordfish to the Sky Sword Marshal was not only an upgrade in status, but also an upgrade in strength. Mo Qianjuan's identity as a swordfish meant that he was the weakest among the Sword Marshal in the Sky Sword Marshal. His opponent was 100 swords, who was in the middle level. Given Mo Qianjuan's status and strength, challenging 100 swords was like throwing an egg against a rock. But at this moment, Mo Qianjun was very determined. His eyes were filled with killing intent, and his whole body was surging with a terrifying momentum. Great heavenly sword seal. Seeing this, Tian's eyes couldn't help but tremble, and he was surprised. At this moment, Mo Qianjun had activated the heavenly sword seal in his body. This is interesting. The 100 swords felt that Mo Qianjun's momentum had risen a lot. He could not help but narrow his eyes. After a moment of surprise, he revealed a playful smile and said, I didn't expect a small fry like you to have some tricks up your sleeves. But this little bit of strength is still too weak to withstand a single blow from me. Buzz! As soon as he finished speaking, a strange-looking black long sword appeared in the hands of the 100 swords cultivator. It looked like a long snake, and let out a strange and mournful cry, filled with an eerie aura. Black snake, he took out the mysterious snake, devours the heavens. The surrounding crowd exclaimed in shock when they saw this. This 100 Swords had a nickname, Black Snake. Chapter 33:14. I've tried. Small fry, how dare you challenge the 100 Swords? You're courting death. In the sky, the 100 Swords, nicknamed the Black Snake, roared and made his move. The sword chi around his body was extremely violent as he attacked with the sky, swallowing Black Snake. Boom! Suddenly, the void trembled and endless sword chi gathered. A giant black snake over 10,000 meters long appeared in the sky. It opened its abyss-like mouth and pounced at Imo Qianjun. What a powerful aura! As expected of the 100 Swords, as expected of the Black Snake. The crowd could not help but exclaim when they felt the aura of the Black Snake's attack. The aura of the Black Snake's attack was extremely violent, as if it was going to swallow the sky. Niefenghua's eyes narrowed as he exclaimed. Even he had to be careful when dealing with such a terrifying attack. Nietian's friend was only a rank 5 pseudo-holiness. Would he be able to withstand this attack? Nietian, on the other hand, looked even more nervous. His eyes glittered with a fierce light as he stared unblinkingly at Imo Qianjun. He was ready to strike at any time. He had rested for 3 days before entering the Blade Master sky, so he had not fully recovered yet. However, he could not watch Imo Qianjun die. Great Sword of the Heavens, kill! At this moment, Imo Qianjun roared and the sword intent in his body surged to the extreme. The Yuan Spirit Sword, limitless great heavens, appeared in his hand and slashed out. A sword shadow that was as majestic as a mountain appeared in the sky, and its violent momentum was not much weaker than that of the black giant snake. The crowd could not help but exclaim. They did not expect Imo Qianjun to be so powerful. Boom! In the next moment, the giant black snake collided with the majestic sword shadow. The void space shook, and the world seemed to be on the verge of collapse. Waves of violent sword will rushed out and were absorbed by the void space in an instant. It was very strange. The space of the Blade Master sky was extremely strange. It had a strong absorption effect on sword chi. Therefore, it was difficult for the sword chi to spread out. Bang! A muffled sound was heard. Imo Qianjun and the black snake swayed at the same time. However, the black snake regained its balance after swaying for a while. Imo Qianjun, on the other hand, retreated several hundred meters. When he finally stabilized himself, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was as pale as paper. However, he still stood firmly on the spot. He suddenly raised his head, and a pair of resolute and murderous eyes stared fixedly at the black snake. Black Snake looked at Imo Qianjun. His face revealed surprise and shock instead of joy. He didn't expect that he wouldn't be able to kill Imo Qianjun with a single sword strike. How? That trash is still alive. The crowd cried out in surprise. It was hard to believe that a swordfish could survive a full-powered strike from 100 Swordfish. Imo Qianjun's strength was beyond everyone's expectation. Again, Imo Qianjun roared. Like a wild beast, his whole body burst out with anger and killing intent. Nietian's expression became even more unsightly upon seeing this. What did the black snake do to make Imo Qianjun so angry? Imo Qianjun was no longer the calm Imo Qianjun that Nietian knew. Instead, he was a fiery Imo Qianjun. Trash, you're courting death. Black Serpent's eyes flashed with killing intent. With a loud roar, the mysterious snake devours the heavens, slashed through the air. A terrifying sword intent pierced through the sky, like a rainbow descending from the sky, after which a terrifying black serpent appeared, its aura incomparably wild and terrifying. The black snake had 2 heads. Its chi was eerie, as if it was going to devour everything. The black snake is really angry. The crowd was shocked. This was the first time they had seen the black snake use a double-headed snake. The black snake was one of the 100 Swords. It would be embarrassing if he could not kill a swordfish. After all, he was one of the 100 swords. Strength was very important to him. If he could not even kill Mo Qianjun, more and more people would challenge him. One sword. At this moment, Mo Qianjun showed no signs of fear. His eyes were filled with battle intent as blood gushed out from his body. At the same time, a terrifying aura of sword intent appeared and surrounded his body, causing the sword aura around him to rise to a terrifying level. Buzz! Boom! In the next moment, the infinite sword of great heavens slashed out. The sound of the sword was like the roar of a dragon and the roar of a tiger. Then, a shadow of a sword broke through the sky. This guy! The crowd's eyes trembled as they cried out in horror. Under such circumstances, Mo Qianjun was able to unleash an even more powerful attack. How terrifying! Boom, boom, boom. Then, the two forces collided. The space shook, and the heavens and earth seemed to be on the verge of exploding. The sword chi wreaked havoc in the sky, but disappeared quickly. Bang! Then, a muffled sound was heard. Mo Qianjun and the black snake retreated at the same time, leaving a trail of blood in the air. The crowd was shocked. Their gazes moved back and forth between the two figures. Black Snake's figure was pushed back 1,000 meters before he managed to stabilize himself. There was a bloody wound on his chest, but his aura was still extremely sharp. On the other hand, Mo Qianjun was like a kite with a broken string. He fell straight down to the ground. He's dead, the crowd exclaimed in shock. Mo Qianjun's strength was beyond their imagination, but he still failed to defeat the Black Snake. And the outcome of defeat was only one word: death. Boom! However, just when everyone was certain that Mo Qianjun was dead, the falling blood-red figure trembled for a moment before releasing a wave of sword intent. The figure strangely stood up and stabilized itself. That guy's still alive. Everyone simply didn't dare to believe their eyes, and they cried out in horror. Who would have thought that after such a terrifying battle, Mo Qianjun would still be alive? Mo Qianjun's body was covered in blood. His body was swaying. Only his eyes were still sharp and filled with unwillingness. Although he was not dead, he had lost. In the end, he was still no match for the Black Snake. Brother Gio, I've tried my best. Mo Qianjun's eyes were trembling. His eyes were filled with tears. He did not fight for himself, but for Jiao Qiansheng. However, he was too weak to defeat the Black Snake. Trash, go to hell. The Black Snake roared and pounced at Mo Qianjun like a ferocious beast. He swung the Black Snake heaven-devouring sword, and the Black Snake reappeared, aiming for Mo Qianjun. Since he had defeated Mo Qianjun, there was no way he would let him live. Mo Qianjun stood still on the spot. He wanted to resist, but he no longer had the strength to do so. Chapter 33:15. Chapter 3:10. Who's the trash? What's going on? The sudden scene in the sky caused everyone's eyes to tremble as they cried out in alarm. No one had expected someone to intervene at Mo Qianjun's moment of life and death. Mo Qianjun had challenged the Black Serpent. This was a fair battle of life and death. Who would be so daring as to intervene? What was even more unexpected was that the person who intervened was extremely strong. With a single slash of his sword, he sliced the Black Serpent in half. Without a doubt, the person who intervened was definitely at the level of 100 swords, or even stronger. At this moment, Mo Qianjun looked at the sword that was whistling through the air, and his eyes couldn't help but tremble. Of course, he could sense how familiar the aura of the sword intent in the sword was. But amidst the familiarity, there was also a sense of unfamiliarity. The arrogance of the sword was still present, but was now filled with a domineering aura and even a dark aura. However, Mo Qianjun was able to confirm that the sword was from his best friend, Nietian. Nietian. Mo Qianjun jerked his head up and saw a familiar face. His whole body went stiff. Although he had already guessed that the person was Nietian, he was still shocked when he saw Nietian with his own eyes. Nietian had actually appeared at his moment of life and death. Brother Mo, are you all right? Nietian moved and appeared beside Mo Qianjun. Energy from the earth vein origin gushed out from his palm and surged into Mo Qianjuan's body. Mo Qianjuan's complexion improved instantly, but his eyes were still trembling uncontrollably. He could not believe what he was seeing. "Brother Mo, please step back. Leave the rest to me." Nye Tian smiled calmly and gestured for Mo Qianjun to step aside. Mo Qianjun replied and stepped aside. At this moment, the black serpent's venomous eyes locked onto Nye Tian, and his voice was filled with murderous intent. "Kid, who are you?" He had already sensed Nye Tian's strength and was curious as to how an 8th-stage pseudo-sage swordsman with a transcendent sword soul had managed to block his attack. What made him even more curious was that Nye Tian's face was very unfamiliar. He seemed to be a swordsman who had just arrived in the sky. "I'm Mo Qianjuan's friend. I don't care what grudges you have with him, but this battle ends here." Nye Tian looked at the black snake and said coldly, "If you want to do anything, come at me." His deep voice was filled with overbearingness. "Come for you? How arrogant of you!" Black Snake sneered. His eyes were filled with contempt as he said, "May I ask, what is your status in the Sky Sword Marshal? 100 swords? Or 1,000 swords?" The crowd's gazes heated up as they looked at Nye Tian. They were obviously very curious about his identity. "I'm not 100 swords, nor am I 1,000 swords. I'm just a swordsman who has just arrived in the Sky Sword Marshal," Nye Tian said calmly in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing. "A small fry." Black Snake's eyes narrowed when he heard Nye Tian's words. He then laughed wildly and said, "A small fry dares to speak so arrogantly? Who gave you the courage to interfere in a life-and-death battle between swordsmen?" The black snake laughed maniacally, its eyes revealing a sinister intent. At this time, the others also laughed. "Small fry? I didn't hear wrong, right? This kid is actually a small fry. One idiot. How dare a small fry like him interfere in a life-and-death battle? Isn't he courting death? This kid's strength is not bad, but it's a pity that he's an idiot. Look at how arrogant he is. He really thinks he's someone important." The crowd roared with laughter as they looked at Nye Tian as if they were looking at an idiot. In the Sky Sword Marshal, outsiders were not allowed to interfere in a life-and-death battle between swordsmen. This was the rule of the Sky Sword Marshal. Of course, the Sky Guardians and Sky Sword Slaves could interfere because they were existences beyond the rules of the Sky Sword Marshal. Apart from the Sky Guardians and Sky Sword Slaves, even Wan Jian was not allowed to interfere in a life-and-death battle between swordsmen. The battle just now was the life-and-death battle between Mo Qianjun and Black Snake. Nye Tian actually dared to interfere. This was undoubtedly a violation of the rules of the Sky Sword Marshal. If his identity was at the level of 1,000 swords, or Wan Jian, he might have a chance to survive. However, he was just a small fry that had just entered the Sky Sword Marshal. His fate was certain to be death. Swordsmen were the lowest and lowly existences among the Sky Sword Marshal, so they were often referred to as small fries. "If you want to fight, I'll accompany you. If you don't want to, then forgive me for not accompanying you." Nye Tian ignored the words of the others and said coldly while looking at Black Snake, "Small fries, you have already violated the rules of the Sky Sword Marshal by interfering in a life-and-death battle between swordsmen. Even if I don't kill you, you won't be able to live." Black Snake said cold, "However, I will still kill you with my own hands. And your useless friend, Mo Qianjun, he will also die, and he will die very miserably." Boom! After saying that, Heishi took a step forward in the air and released a terrifying sword force. The sword chi actually condensed into a giant serpent figure outside his body. It was very terrifying and exuded a gloomy aura. His sword chi was very rare. Instead of condensing a sword shadow, it was condensed into the shadow of a snake. "I don't want to kill you, but if you continue to be aggressive, then don't blame me for being impolite," Nye Tian said coldly with a murderous look on his face. "Small fries, you are so arrogant. Aren't you afraid that the wind will cut your tongue?" Black Snake smiled coldly, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Then He moved his body and directly attacked with the sky-devouring mysterious snake in his hand. The sword in his hand slashed out wildly, and the shadow of the sword surged out like raging waves. Boom! In the void, a giant black snake appeared with a momentum that could devour the heavens, pressing down on Yetion. So strong. That small fries is dead for sure. The eyes of the crowd trembled as they thought to themselves. Although Yetion had displayed amazing combat strength, he was only an 8th-ranked pseudo-sage, and his sword principle was only at the transcendent sword spirit. It was impossible for him to block Black Snake's attack. Sacred heaven-defying sword. Heavenly sword reverses the sun. Hovering in midair, Yetion looked down at the giant serpent that was charging at him. His eyes narrowed as he summoned the Star Heaven Slash. As he slashed out, the void trembled, and a sword shadow whizzed out with a fierce momentum, as if it was going to tear the void apart. In the next moment, a shocking scene happened. Kaboom! The terrifying shadow of the sword whizzed out and actually tore the black snake apart. The void exploded with a thunderous sound. Boom! Then, the shadow of the sword broke through the void and pressed down. Black Snake immediately felt a terrifying suppressive force that was going to tear his martial body apart. In the next moment, before Black Snake could react, his body was directly engulfed by the shadow of the sword. Not even his bones were left. 100 swords died, tragically, just like that. Hiss! Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air, and the entire place fell into a deathly silence. Chapter 33:16. Chapter 3:11. 1,000 Swords of Wind and Thunder. Who is a small fry? The domineering voice was like a clap of thunder, resounding in everyone's ears, causing them to tremble as if they had been electrocuted. Yetion's battle prowess was so terrifying that it made everyone tremble. Yetion had killed the Black Serpent with just one sword strike. Such terrifying battle prowess could only be described as world-shaking. At this moment, everyone realized that this silver-haired swordsman who had just come to the sky sword martialism was not an ordinary swordfish. This is too terrifying. After a long time, everyone reacted and exclaimed. They looked at Yetion with unconcealable fear and dread. Yetion, however, didn't pay any attention to them. He turned around and prepared to leave. Boy, you broke the rules of the sky sword martialism and killed 100 swords. Do you think you can just leave like this? At this moment, a voice filled with killing intent rang out in the air. After that, a black-robed silhouette appeared, exuding an oppressive pressure that caused the entire space to tremble, causing everyone to feel a stifling pressure. Feeling great pressure, Yetion suddenly turned around. When he saw the martial artist in black, he could not help but narrow his eyes. This martial artist in black was as sharp as a sword, cold as ice, and his aura was very terrifying. Without a doubt, this was a swordsman with ultimacy. Yetion felt that this martial artist's sword essence was not inferior to Nie Fenghua's. Han Qinxiu. At the same time, Nie Fenghua saw the martial artist in black. His eyes narrowed, and his expression turned ugly. This martial artist in black was called Han Qinxiu. His identity in the sky sword martialism was 1,000 swords. 1,000 swords was considered very powerful among the sword martialists in the sky sword martialism. The Black Serpent who had died under Yetion's sword was Han Qinxiu's subordinate. Han Qinxiu's appearance was obviously to avenge the Black Serpent. Lord Six Sky, are you still not going to make a move? Nie Fenghua frowned and looked at the void. The corner of his mouth twitched as he murmured in a low voice. In that void, a sharp figure was faintly discernible, obviously observing everything. This figure was Six Sky of the Sky Sword Martialists. The Six Sky sword slaves were divided according to their strength. Their titles were Great Sky to Six Sky. Among the 6 Haoyan sword slaves, Lu Haoyan's strength was at the bottom. However, for others, he was definitely in existence that they could only look up to. Nie Fenghua knew that Six Sky martialists had been observing everything in the void, as if he was waiting for something. What he was waiting for was for Nyetian to burst forth with even greater power. At this moment, Nyetian was already very powerful and talented, but he still hadn't met his requirements. Sky. 6 at any 1 sky. Sword Saint 6 6 sword 6 9,000 swords. Nyetian at any 1 saint 1 sky sword sky. Of 6 6 sword saints of spirit. Of Nya Nya of 1,000 king is sword. Of sword. Kid. The person you killed was Ben Qianjian subordinate. If you can swagger away after killing him, then how can I, Han Qinxiu, be called 1,000 swords? Han Qinxiu's eyes were filled with murderous intent. He could no longer control the sword intent aura around him, and it continued to spread into the surroundings. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. An ear-piercing sound rang out in the space, as though space and time were slowly being torn apart under the pressure of the sword intent. So, you want to kill me? Nyetian frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, Brat, although you have violated the rules of the Sky Sword Warrior, you are still a swordfish. This Qinxiu does not wish to bully the weak. If you can block this Qinxiu sword, then you can live. Han Qinxiu's eyes surged with killing intent as he spoke. 1 strike, is it? Nyetian's eyes narrowed slightly, and the corners of his mouth curled into a smile. He stood with his hands behind his back and said lightly, Come on. Han Qinxiu's strength was not something she could compare with. However, Nyetian was not afraid at all. The sword he used to kill she was far from his limit. If it was a life-and-death battle, he was very confident that he could kill Han Qinxiu. Trash, you have just come to the Sky Sword Warrior, so you have no idea how terrifying this place is. You swordsmen from the outside world are nothing in the eyes of the Sky Sword Warriors. Han Qinxiu sneered and took a step forward. His entire body's sword intent burst out, and his whole body was like a volcano that had suddenly erupted. The terrifying sword intent rushed into the void as though it was going to drown everything. So much nonsense. Nyetian sneered and said directly, Make your move. You are courting death. Han Qinxiu was instantly enraged, and the sword intent in his body instantly became violent. It actually formed a terrifying storm of blades around his body. It was like a hurricane, exploding and extremely sharp. What a terrifying aura. The eyes of the crowd trembled, and they were shocked by Han Qinxiu's strength. A swordsman of the wind attribute. No wonder his sword intent is so sharp. Nyetian's eyes slightly narrowed as he said indifferently, Han Qinxiu was a rare swordsman of the wind attribute, which was out of Nyetian's expectation. Trash. I am not just a simple swordsman of the wind attribute. Nyetian's voice was very soft, but it was heard clearly by Han Qinxiu. The latter sneered and took a step forward. The sword intent hurricane around his body suddenly moved, and it madly rushed towards Nyetian. The 5 senses of a rank 9 pseudo-sacred martial artist had already reached an extremely terrifying level. Their eyesight could directly see the scene hundreds of thousands of meters away, and their hearing could hear the slightest movement within tens of thousands of meters. Their sense of smell and other abilities were also very terrifying. Boom! At the moment when the sword intent hurricane crashed down, there was a sudden explosion. Immediately after, in the center of the hurricane, the power of a dark thunderbolt appeared, stretching for tens of thousands of meters and pressing towards Nyetian. Dual attribute of wind and thunder. Nyetian's eyes slightly narrowed as he realized that Han Qinxiu was a swordsman of the dual attribute of wind and thunder. However, the aura of his sword intent of the wind attribute was more intense, and it covered the sword intent of the thunder attribute. However, his sword intent of the thunder attribute was more lethal. This guy is dead for sure. The crowd's eyes trembled. They had already determined that the moment the power of the thunderbolt fell, it would be the moment that Nyetian's soul would perish. Nyetian stood in the air, and there was no fear in his eyes. Instead, he was as calm as an ancient well. Sacred heaven-defying sword. Earth and man unite. Stars and moon sink. The next moment, the corner of his mouth twitched, and the sword intent burst out of his body. The star's heavenly slash went against the momentum, and suddenly, the sword shadow in the air like a startled dragon, stirring up the void and making it tremble. Boom! Boom, boom, boom. Then, the power of the thunderbolt and the sword's shadow collided head-on. The void suddenly exploded, and a wave of sword intent appeared. In the world of sword martial arts in the sky, the fact that Nie Tian and Han Qianqiu's sword intent could form a wave of sword intent was enough to prove the strength of their sword intents. The crowd's eyes widened, and they gasped in shock. They had never thought that Nie Tian would be able to explode with such a powerful sword intent. However, Nie Tian was clearly only at the level of sword soul, surpassing God. How could his sword intent be so terrifying? Bang! At this time, there was a muffled explosion in the sky. Nie Tian and Han Qianqiu's figures retreated 1,000 meters at the same time, and then they both stood still. However, the expressions on the two's faces were completely different. Nie Tian's face was calm, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. There was a faint smile on his face. On the other hand, Han Qianqiu's face was so gloomy that it looked like it was dripping blood. His eyes were bloodshot, and his body was trembling. This sword was actually on par with the two of them. Chapter 33:17. Contemptible wretch Han Qianqiu's eyes trembled, his face trembled, and his body trembled. Even the blood in his body was trembling, as though his entire being was boiling. He was one of the 1,000 swords, but he was tied with a new swordfish. How could he accept this? Anger, killing intent, madness. Like a storm, it enveloped him, making him look extremely violent and sinister. At this moment, Nie Tian looked at Han Qianqiu and said indifferently, "Lord Qianqiu, is this your sword move?" His words were filled with extreme mockery. Before Han Qianqiu made his move, he swore that if Nie Tian could block one of his sword strikes, he would be able to live. It was obvious that he was very confident in his sword. However, not only did Nie Tian easily receive his sword, he was not weaker than him. At this moment, Nie Tian's words were like a slap to Han Qianqiu's face. "Stinking brat, you." Han Qianqiu's eyes darkened to the extreme, and he gritted his teeth. He had never imagined that Nie Tian's strength could actually be so terrifying. His earlier attack was enough to kill a swordsman with a pseudo-divine sword body rank 9. However, Nie Tian was only a pseudo-divine sword soul rank 8. How could he block his attack so easily? If he had known that Nie Tian was such a monster, Han Qianqiu would have gone all out in that attack. But now, he couldn't attack anymore. After all, he was 1,000 swords. If he went back on his word in front of so many people, he would no longer have any prestige among the sword martial artists in the sky. "Since the sword is past, I won't play with you anymore." Nie Tian smiled faintly and prepared to leave. Han Qianqiu stared at Nie Tian, a cold light flashing in his eyes. The blood in his body was roiling as a bloody aura began to emanate from him. He was unwilling. The crowd looked at Han Qianqiu and could not help but whisper among themselves, "Lord Han Qianjian, are we going to let this kid go just like that? What else can I do?" Han Qianjian was too careless and underestimated this new fish. But since I've already said it, I can't go back on my words. Han Qianjian suffered a great loss this time. Not only did he lose one of his 100 swords, he also lost face in front of everyone. He really suffered a double loss. Some people couldn't help but laugh. When Han Qianqiu heard these words, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and the blood in his body began to boil uncontrollably. Boom! The next moment, his body shook, and a terrifying sword momentum surged around him. It was extremely terrifying, and the sharp aura actually formed an invisible ripple in the air. What is Han Qianjian doing? Was he crazy? He's going back on his word in front of everyone. When the crowd saw this, their eyes trembled violently, and they cried out in alarm. Everyone knew that Han Qianqiu was resentful, but they never imagined that he would go back on his word in front of everyone. Looking at his posture, it was clear that he was going to attack Nie Tian. Nietion suddenly turned around and couldn't help but frown when he saw Han Chinchio in a rage. Stinking brat. I said that I would let you live, but I didn't say that I would let your friend live. At this moment, Han Chinchio's voice was like thunder, and his figure directly moved. A dark green long sword appeared in his hand, and he actually slashed the sword at Mo Qianjun. He was very smart. He didn't attack Nietion, but Mo Qianjun instead. He had said in front of everyone that if Nietion could withstand his sword, he would be able to live. Of course, he couldn't go back on his word. However, he could kill Mo Qianjun to vent the hatred in his heart. Moreover, he could see that Mo Qianjun was very important to Nietion, so it was impossible for Nietion to just stand by and watch. Damn it! Nietion's face darkened, and he roared in a low voice. His figure instantly moved, and Starlight Heavenly Slash was unleashed. The sword's shadow roared, and like a giant roaring dragon, it attacked Han Chinchio. Small fry, if you dare to attack me, then don't blame me for being ruthless. Han Chinchio suddenly turned in midair, and the sword's edge directly changed. It directly turned towards Nietion and crazily slashed at him. The sudden change in the sky caused everyone to be shocked. One after another, they all sucked in a breath of cold air, and the shock in their hearts was indescribable. At this moment, anyone with a bit of brain could see that Han Chinchio's move was a hidden sword. On the surface, it seemed that he wanted to kill Mo Qianjun, but in reality, he wanted to kill Nietion. He was certain that Nietion would definitely save Mo Qianjun, and then he would force Nietion to attack him. Seeing this scene, Nie Fenghua's face darkened, and he roared, "Despicable!" Someone of Han Chinchio's status actually used this kind of method. It was really despicable. Boom! At this time, in the void, the power of a dark thunder appeared. It was extremely terrifying, and it struck down from the sky. It was actually tens of thousands of meters long, and it seemed that even the heaven and earth would be split apart. Han Chinchio was indeed despicable. He secretly accumulated his sword intent and wanted to kill Nietion with a single strike. With his status, if he still couldn't kill Nietion with a second strike, he would really lose all his face. 9 limits of starry sky, sun annihilation. In a hurry, Nietion stabbed out with his sword. The sword's shadow rolled out like a rolling mountain, and its majestic momentum shook the heaven and earth. Rumble. In the next moment, the two extreme forces collided, and the heaven and earth trembled. The rolling momentum spread out like a raging sea, as if it wanted to swallow everything. Bang! Then, a muffled sound was heard, and a blood-colored figure was sent flying. After retreating for a few thousand meters, he finally stabilized his body. It's that kid, he's not dead. The crowd's eyes trembled as they stared at the blood-colored figure. After a shout, their faces were full of shock. On Nietion's body, there was a horrifying wound from his shoulder to his waist. It was so deep that his bones could be seen, and his entire body was covered in blood. This bloody gash practically split his entire body into 2 halves. This was left behind by Han Chinchio's Dark Thunderbolt. If this thunderbolt was a little stronger, Nietion would have definitely been cut in half. It had to be said that Nietion's martial body was really strong. He had actually forcefully resisted the Dark Thunderbolt. Han Chinchio looked at Nietion, and his eyes froze for a moment. Then, a shocked expression appeared on his face. Nietion was actually not dead. This was something that he had not expected. He had almost used all his strength in that thunderbolt, but Nietion was still alive. How is this possible? Han Chinchio's face became more and more ugly, from white to green, from green to red, from red to black. His eyes were sinister, like a poisonous wolf that was about to devour a human. The mighty 1,000 swords couldn't even kill a new fish with 2 strikes. How would he put his face? Despicable bastard. At this time, Nietion's body suddenly moved. With a sudden jerk, the blood on his body scattered, and the wound on his chest began to heal. Chapter 33:18. Attack. Dragon Roar. The crowd gasped with astonishment as they stared at Nyetian with wide eyes, disbelief filling their faces. Nyetian's body was emitting a dragon roar. Was he a member of the Sage Realm Dragon Clan? Rumor had it that the Sage Realm Dragon Clan possessed an extremely powerful dragon bloodline. It was extremely terrifying. There is a dragon roar in this kid's body. He must be a Sage Realm Dragon Clan member. The crowd thought to themselves, trembling. They looked at Nyetian with even more shock. The Sage Realm Dragon Clan was a martial artist from the Holy World. No wonder Nyetian was so powerful. It turned out that he was from the Saint's World. The Sword Martial School in the sky was not only connected to various domains, but also to some holy worlds. There were many martial artists from the Holy World in the Sword Martial School in the sky. Is this kid really a Sage Realm Dragon Clan member? Han Qinshu muttered to himself as he looked at Nyetian. His eyes flickered as if he was afraid. If Nyetian was a Sage Realm Dragon Clan member, it meant that he was from the Holy World and had a powerful force behind him. Han Qinshu had heard that the Sage Realm Dragon Clan members had two forms, human and dragon. Moreover, the Sage Realm Dragon Clan members had an obvious characteristic, a strong martial body. The Dragon Clan members had the dragon bloodline. Their martial body was very strong, and their recovery ability was astonishing. Nyetian's performance at the moment, a strong martial body, a freakish recovery ability, and the dragon roar in his body. It was obvious that he was a Sage Realm Dragon Clan member. Han Qinshu was more and more convinced of his guess. He could not help but panic. He had a vague feeling that he had provoked someone he could not afford to offend. A Dragon Clan member? Up in the sky, the Six Sky Master looked at Nyetian and frowned. Then he twitched his mouth and murmured to himself. It seems that he is not a Dragon Clan member, but a martial artist who has merged with the dragon vein. He was very far away from Nyetian, but he could still tell that the dragon roar in Nyetian's body came from the dragon vein. This kid is interesting. Number 6 Sky narrowed his eyes slightly, and the corners of his mouth twitched again. His eyes were burning with passion, as if he was very interested in Nyetian. Since you want to fight, then come. At this time, Nyetian looked at Han Qinshu and growled, I challenge you right now. Let's fight to the death. A battle of life and death. These 4 words were like a clap of thunder, causing everyone's eyes to tremble. They were shocked to the extreme. A swordfish that had just arrived at the sky, Sword Martial actually wanted to challenge a 1,000 swords powerhouse. Wasn't this courting death? Indeed, Nyetian had displayed an almost abnormal battle prowess just now, but he was still at a disadvantage. Han Qinshu's sword had failed to kill him, but it had seriously injured him. For Nyetian to openly issue a challenge at this time was tantamount to striking a rock with an egg. This kid from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan is still too young. With his status, there's no need for him to fight with Han Qinshu. After all, he's too young. He's too impulsive. Impulsiveness is the devil. If such a talented Dragon Clan swordsman dies like this, it'll really make people excited. Ha. The crowd's eyes were trembling with passion, as if they couldn't wait to see the moment when Nyetian was killed. They were all sure that Nyetian was from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan and had a distinguished background. He was not an ordinary martial artist, and the more distinguished a person was, the more satisfied they felt when they saw him die in front of them. Kid, do you really want to fight to the death with me? Han Qinshu looked at Nyetian and couldn't help but tremble in fear. He hadn't expected that Nyetian would dare to challenge him. In his opinion, the sword just now had already made Nyetian unable to fight back. If Nyetian challenged him now, he would be courting death. Attack! Nyetian's eyes were gloomy, and his long sword swept across the sky as he spat out 2 words coldly. His current state was indeed not good, and he hadn't fully recovered from his previous injuries. But in the face of the aggressive Han Qinshu, he couldn't retreat anymore. He wanted to fight and let everyone know that he, Nyetian, wasn't a pushover. If he retreated at this time, he was afraid that his future days in the sky sword martial competition would not be good. Kid, you forced me to do this. Don't think that I'll be afraid of you, just because you have a distinguished status. In the sky sword martial competition, your status is useless. Han Qianqiu's eyes trembled, and his eyes became murderous as he growled coldly. He believed that Nie Tian was from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan, so he wanted to let Nie Tian go. However, Nie Tian insisted on challenging him, so he had no choice but to kill him. Even if Nie Tian was from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan, it would be useless in the Sky Sword martial competition. So much nonsense. Nie Tianling sneered. From the discussion of the crowd, just now, he already knew that they thought that he was from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan. He didn't need to clarify anything, and he disdained to do so. "You're courting death," Han Qianqiu said coldly, and then looked at the sky. He cupped his hands and said, "Your Excellency in the sixth sky, you saw that I didn't want to kill him, but he was courting death. If he dies in my hands, Your Excellency in the sky, please prove that he was courting death, and it had nothing to do with me." In the end, Han Qianqiu was still afraid of the Sage Realm Dragon Clan, so he asked the Sixth Sky for instructions. Nie Fenghua could sense the existence of the Sixth Sky, and so could Han Qianqiu. "Your Excellency in the Sixth Sky is also here." Hearing Han Qianqiu's words, the crowd couldn't help but be shocked, and then looked at the sky. "Han Qianqiu, he's not from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan. You don't have to worry about anything." The void was silent for a while, and then a deep voice came out, with a sharp aura that seemed to pierce through people's eardrums. It made people feel a deep pressure. Hearing the Sixth Sky's words, Han Qianqiu was stunned at first, and then his eyes trembled with a hint of surprise. He bowed and said, "Thank you, Your Excellency in the sky." The Sixth Sky replied, and directly said that Nie Tian wasn't from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan. This was something that Han Qianqiu hadn't expected even in his wildest dreams. In this way, he really didn't have to worry about anything. "Young man, I, the sky, would like to see how strong you are." In the void, the Sixth Sky fixed his eyes on Nie Tian and smiled. "I hope you won't disappoint me, the sky." The Sixth Sky was shocked by Nie Tian's strength. He could feel that there was an even more powerful force in Nie Tian's body. Therefore, he wanted to see how strong Nie Tian's combat strength was. So this young man isn't from the Sage Realm Dragon Clan. It was a false alarm. The crowd looked at Nie Tian, and when they realized what was going on, they burst into laughter. The fear in their eyes instantly turned into contempt. "You're dead, you small fry." At that moment, Han Qianqiu stepped forward, and his eyes were filled with killing intent. The sword essence in his body burst out like a tsunami, forming a terrible storm of sword essence around his body. Boom, boom, boom. A terrifying storm of sword intent surged into the void, causing the heavens and earth to tremble and the weather to change. This time, Han Qianqiu was really angry. Chapter 33:19. A shocking battle. What a terrifying aura. The crowd could feel the terrifying waves coming from the sky, and they were all shocked. The power that Han Qianqiu displayed now was much stronger than before. It seemed that Han Qianqiu had hidden some of his strength in the previous two attacks. Nie Tian. Nie Fenghua felt Han Qianqiu's aura, and his eyes narrowed. He was a little nervous. He was not sure if Nie Tian had the strength to fight Han Qianqiu to the death. If Nie Tian was at his peak, there should be no problem. But Nie Tian's old injuries had not yet healed, and he had suffered new ones. His condition was very poor. Could he be a match for Han Qianqiu? Brother Nie. On the other side, Mo Qianjun looked at Nie Tian worriedly. The strength that Nie Tian had displayed had deeply shocked him. Only now did he realize that the distance between him and Nie Tian had widened. But at this moment, Nie Tian's opponent was Han Qianqiu, a cultivator with 1,000 swords. "Small fry, prepare to die." Han Qianqiu's roar was like thunder. His aura was extremely violent, and a terrifying aura flowed around his body. It was as if his every move could cause the heavens and earth to tremble. "Come on." Nie Tian's eyes were dark, and his face was as calm as still water. There was not the slightest ripple in his eyes. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly, and then the sword within his body surged wildly. At this moment, the celestial evolution saint spirit in his body became violent. The celestial evolution's saint power was like a fierce beast, rushing into his body and merging with the sword will. Once again, he used the celestial evolution saint power to forcefully increase the level of his swordsmanship. What's going on? That kid's sword will aura is actually becoming stronger. At this moment, the crowd felt that something was wrong, and their eyes trembled as they cried out. Everyone present was a swordsman, and they were all sword geniuses of their respective fields. They were very sensitive to the aura of sword will. What they could not believe was that Nye Tion's sword was actually becoming stronger. It was too strange. A swordsman's sword will aura should be stable, and it should not be suddenly becoming stronger. His sword principal realm has increased. At the next moment, someone noticed the abnormality and cried out. Their faces were filled with shock, as if they had seen the most terrifying thing in the world. They simply couldn't believe their eyes. A swordsman's sword Dao cultivation had risen by a great realm in an instant. He had only heard of the explosive Yuan pill being able to forcefully raise a cultivator's cultivation, but he had never seen a swordsman forcefully raise his sword Dao realm. What kind of person was Nye Tian? What kind of tricks was he using? The crowd was completely shocked. Their faces were lifeless, and countless eyes looked at Nye Tian as if they were looking at a monster. Die! Han Xinxiu had naturally sensed the changes in Nye Tian's sword intent. But at this moment, he didn't have the time to think too much about it. He could only go all out and kill with a single strike. Boom! With a furious roar, Han Xinxiu slashed out furiously with his sword. All of the sword intent in his body condensed in an instant, and a gigantic sword intent hurricane appeared. It was ferocious and terrifying, churning in the air. Suddenly, an incomparably powerful strangulation force appeared, instantly filling the space within a radius of tens of thousands of meters. The crowd, that was more than 100,000 meters away, all felt a suffocating pressure. Han Xinxiu was indeed worthy of being called 1,000 swords. The strength of his sword intent and his control of it had reached the acme of perfection. Roar! In the next moment, a violent roar came from within the storm of sword intent. Then, a giant dark thunder beast appeared and fiercely pounced out. The void suddenly sank, as if it was about to collapse. The body of the giant dark beast was tens of thousands of meters long, and dark thunder flowed around its body. It was incomparably terrifying, as if it was about to devour the world. When the crowd saw this scene, their eyes suddenly trembled, and they exclaimed so strong. At this moment, the crowd finally saw Han Xinxiu's true strength. 1,000 swords martial artist was indeed very terrifying. When his aura erupted, heaven and earth shook. Sacred heaven defying sword. Earth and man become one. Stars and moon sink. At this moment, Nye Tianling stood in the void like a boulder in the midst of a storm. He did not move at all, and even his face was expressionless. Only the corner of his mouth twitched, as if he was mumbling to himself. In the next moment, the sword intent around his body surged wildly, and at the same time, there was a dripping blood aura. Boom! Following which, the starlight heavenly slash was unleashed, and a blood-colored sword shadow whizzed out from where the sword tip pointed. It was like a ferocious beast pouncing out from the boundless raging sea. Its momentum was boundlessly terrifying. In this attack, not only did Nye Tian use the heavenly evolution holy power to raise his sword principle to the ultimate divine sword body, but he also ignited his blood chi to stimulate the power of the sword intent even more violently. At this moment, his martial body felt like it was about to explode. It was as if the meridians and bones in his body were about to be torn apart. The pressure brought about by the heavenly evolution holy power and self-igniting blood chi was extremely terrifying. Even though Nye Tian's martial body was strong, it was still very difficult. It was precisely because of this that this attack allowed him to explode with his maximum power. Boom! Boom! In the void, the dark lightning beast and the terrifying sword shadow whistled, causing heaven and earth to roar, as if the sky and earth were about to collapse. Boom, boom, boom. In the next moment, Under the gaze of countless pairs of eyes, the two terrifying forces collided with each other. Heaven and earth became solemn, and time and space suddenly stopped. Then, the violent power turned into a raging wave that surged wildly, as if the entire world was about to be drowned. Boom, boom, boom. In the sky, ear-piercing rumbling sounds could be heard. The powerful and terrifying impact was like a wild beast in the sky, and thousands of demons danced wildly. These two people are too strong. The eyes of the crowd trembled, and the shock in their hearts was indescribable. After all, Han Chinchou was 1,000 swords. It was not surprising that he had such powerful strength. However, Nie Tian was only an 8th-stage pseudo-sage, and his sword principle was only at the transcendent sword soul realm. How could he explode with such terrifying power? Boom! After a long time, the dark lightning beast and the blood-colored sword shadow collapsed at almost the same time. Then, with a muffled sound, the two figures instantly retreated and were pushed 10,000 meters away. In the air, Nie Tian's astral soul wings appeared on his back, and he stabilized his body. His face was as pale as a sheet of paper, but he was not injured. On the other side, Han Chinchou stabilized himself, but his face was very ugly. There were several frightening wounds on his body, and blood was dripping from them. In the collision of the ultimate sword, Han Chinchou had lost. How was this possible? The crowd was shocked, and they could not believe their eyes. What did they see? After the sword attack, the person who was injured was actually Han Chinchou, and Nie Tian was actually unharmed. Everyone's eyes were focused on Nie Tian, as if they were looking at a monster, and the shock in their hearts reached deep into their souls. The sword intent that Nie Tian had displayed had subverted their understanding of the sword principle. It was unimaginable that someone's sword intent could be so terrifying. Puff! However, at this moment, Nie Tian's body trembled slightly, and then he vomited a mouthful of blood, and his face became even paler. He's injured. The crowd's eyes trembled, and they exclaimed. Nie Tian frowned, and he wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He was not injured by Han Chinchou, but under the double pressure of the celestial evolution sacred force and blood chi, his martial body could not withstand it, and he was injured instead. Chapter 33:20. Chapter 3:15. Battle in the Sky Die. Han Chinchou roared in the sky. His eyes were eerie as he swung his sword at Nie Tian. Even though he had been defeated and injured, he still had the strength to fight. On the other hand, Nie Tian was not defeated, but he was injured. Before Nie Tian made his move, he was already in a very bad state. The celestial sacred force and the blood chi were so oppressive that he could not bear it, and his martial body was severely injured. Therefore, Han Chinchou had the absolute advantage. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and his heart sank. At this moment, if he were to forcefully use the celestial sacred force to break through to the martial body, even if he could explode with great power, it would cause great harm to his martial body. It might even damage his martial arts foundation. However, if he did not use the celestial sacred force, he would not be able to block Han Chinchou's fatal strike. In an instant, he was caught in a dilemma. Lord Six Sky, are you still not going to make your move? At this moment, Nie Fenghua looked at the sky, his eyes trembling. He was ready to make his move. He was also in a very bad state at this moment. The backlash from the sword seal was still there. If he were to forcefully use the sword will, it would cause great harm to his martial body. Boom! In the next instant, a black lightning bolt appeared. It was extremely fast, sharp, and deadly, and it attacked Nie Tian. Nie Tian immediately felt a terrifying suppressive force, which actually made him feel like he was suffocating. Swoosh! At this moment of life and death, a sword will suddenly appear in the void, piercing through the air like the wind and lightning. It was so fast that it was difficult for the naked eye to follow, as if it was tearing through the void. Poof! The sword will looked ordinary, but the moment it fell, it pierced through the black lightning bolt. The black lightning bolt immediately collapsed, turning into sword will and dissipating. Han Chinchou's body froze as he muttered in confusion. He then looked at the sky in shock. The figure that entered his eyes caused his expression to freeze, and he was immediately dumbfounded. The person who had made the move was none other than Six Sky. At this moment, the Six Sky's figure descended. His footwork was strange, and he floated over like a ghost. This person's sword was so strong. Tian looked up at the Six Sky and couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. He was shocked. The Six Sky in front of him was too terrifying. That sword intent, just now, could be said to be terrifying to the point of being bizarre. It had easily neutralized Han Qianqiu's ultimate move. Outside of the Six Sky's body, there was a faint halo, which was very mysterious. It seemed to be some kind of sword formation. Tian could only sense that the Six Sky was very powerful, but he could not tell how strong the latter was. It could be concluded that the Six Sky was definitely a Saint Realm martial artist, and his Sword Dao realm had already surpassed the transcendent three realms. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to stop Han Qianqiu in such a crushing manner. Lord Sixth Hao Tian. When everyone saw Sixth Hao Tian appear, their eyes froze, and they were extremely shocked. They already knew that the Six Sky had been secretly watching the battle between Tian and Han Qianqiu. However, they didn't expect that the Six Sky would personally intervene. Lord Six Sky. Han Qianqiu looked at the Six Sky and bowed deeply. He was very respectful. At this moment, he already had a bad feeling in his heart. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to kill Tian. Han Qianqiu, this battle is over. The Six Sky said indifferently without looking at Han Qianqiu. His tone was very calm, without the slightest bit of aggression. However, there was an inviolable dominance in his calm tone. Han Qianqiu's heart sank. He didn't even dare to hesitate and nodded. His heart was filled with unwillingness, but what was the use of it? He did not dare disobey the Sixth Hao Yin in the slightest. Then, the Six Sky looked at Tian with an expressionless face and asked, "What's your name?" Tian. Tian nodded slightly. He was neither servile nor overbearing. "Who is Fenghua to you?" The Six Sky's eyes flickered with a strange light as he asked. "My father." Tian nodded again. "Very well." The Six Sky's eyes flickered again. The corner of his mouth twitched a little as he said, "I, the Sky, will give you 10 days. After 10 days, I, the Sky, will fight with you." Tian's expression changed when he heard the Six Sky's words. He thought he had heard it wrong. The Six Sky actually wanted to fight with him. The crowd was also stunned. Their faces were filled with disbelief. The Six Sky actually took the initiative to challenge Tian. He was treating Tian as a real opponent. Was Tian really that strong? Tian was stunned. He was speechless for a long time. He didn't know the Six Sky's strength at all. The difference between the two of them was indescribable. Was there any point in fighting with such a difference? Don't worry. The Six Sky obviously knew what Tian was thinking. He said, "I, the Sky, won't take advantage of you. When I fight with you, I, the Sky, will suppress my strength and realm to the same as yours. For the next 10 days, you don't have to do anything else. Just focus on recovering your strength." With that, the Sixth Hao Yin took a glance at Tian, and then his figure flashed and vanished like a streak of light. Tian was stunned. He looked at the place where the Sixth Sky disappeared. He couldn't react for a long time. Tian, follow Fenghua. At this time, the Sixth Sky's voice sounded again. Then it disappeared completely. Tian frowned. After a long time, he laughed. He didn't expect to receive a challenge from a Sky on the first day he came to the Sky Swordsmiths. Small fry. Count yourself lucky. At this time, Han Qianqiu looked at Tian fiercely. He growled and left unwillingly. The Sixth Sky and Tian's challenge made everyone stay away from Tian. If someone wanted to kill Tian at this time, they would undoubtedly be going against the Sixth Sky. In the Sky Swordsmiths, except for the Sky Guardians, no one dared to go against the Sword Slaves of the Sky. The Sky Swordsmiths were in charge of everyone in the Sky Swordsmiths except for the Sky Guardians. The others looked at Tian with fear in their eyes. It took a long time for them to disperse. Tian. At this time, Nie Fenghua and Mo Qianjun came to Nie Tian's side and called out at the same time. Nie Tian smiled faintly and introduced them to each other. Junior Mo Qianjun greets Lord Uncle. Mo Qianjun looked puzzled. He didn't expect Nie Tian to have a father. He bowed deeply to Nie Fenghua and said respectfully, "Your martial Dao cultivation is not high, but your sword Dao realm is very strong." "Not bad." Nie Fenghua nodded slightly. He didn't pay attention to Mo Qianjun before. Only now did he realize that the latter was a rare sword Dao genius. "Brother Mo, are you okay?" Nie Tian couldn't help but ask when he saw Mo Qianjun's ugly expression. "I'm fine, but Brother Jiao." Mo Qianjun furrowed his brows, and his expression became even uglier. He couldn't finish his sentence. "Jiao Qiansheng." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and his expression changed. What happened to him? Jiao Qiansheng was indeed with Mo Qianjun, but from Mo Qianjun's reaction, it seemed that something had happened to Jiao Qiansheng. In fact, the reason why Mo Qianjun had challenged a black serpent was because of Jiao Qiansheng. "Brother Nye, come with me." Mo Qianjun did not answer directly. Instead, he nodded his head and flew toward a valley below with a movement of his body. Chapter 33:21. Jiao Qiansheng. In the sky soared Martial City, outside a valley. Nie Fenghua, Nie Tian, and Mo Qianjun were standing at the entrance of the valley. Nie Tian exclaimed in surprise as he stared at the valley in front of him. Before he entered the valley, he could already smell a rotten stench, as if the valley in front of him was a huge morgue. "Brother Jiao." Mo Qianjun looked at Nie Tian uneasily and choked for a moment before he said, "Brother Jiao is in the valley." Nie Tian's eyes trembled and his heart skipped a beat when he saw Mo Qianjun's reaction. He suddenly had a bad feeling about this. He then entered the valley. Roar! At that moment, a low roar was heard. It sounded like the roar of a wild beast, and it was filled with a bloody and violent aura. Nie Tian frowned and stepped into the valley without hesitation. His eyes narrowed, and his face stiffened when he saw the scene before him. In the valley, there were several huge iron chains, and in the middle of those iron chains was a black figure. This black figure was simply too strange and terrifying. He was lying on the ground like a dog. His entire body was black, and he looked like a skeleton. However, there were pieces of rotten flesh hanging on the outside of the skeleton. The flesh was extremely bloody, and it gave off a nauseating smell. However, his face was 70% human. His eyes were bloodshot, and they were filled with a violent aura. Roar, roar, roar. He stared at Nie Tian and let out a deep roar. It sounded extremely eerie. "This is..." Nie Tian was stunned for a long time before he finally spoke. His voice was trembling, and he could not say a word. He could clearly sense Jiao Qiansheng's aura from a monster in front of him. Jiao Qiansheng. The monster in front of him was the former Sword Emperor of the Western region, Jiao Qiansheng. Nie Tian's eyes were trembling. He could not believe what he was seeing. His best friend, his sworn brother, had turned into this. How could he accept it? Mo Qianjun stood behind Nie Tian and nodded with a pained expression. This monster was none other than Jiao Qiansheng. This. Nie Tian's pupils shrank. His killing intent surged, and his blood surged. He roared, "Who did this?" Boom! As soon as he finished speaking, a terrifying aura surged from his body, causing the entire valley to shake. Roar! At that moment, Jiao Qiansheng seemed to be provoked. With a loud roar, he sprang into action, leaping into the air and reaching out with his sharp claws towards Nie Tian. "Be careful!" Nie Fenghua cried out in fright upon seeing this. Nie Tian stood still, allowing the sharp claws to fall and leave several bloody wounds on his chest. Nie Tian. Nie Fenghua stared blankly, momentarily speechless. In that instant, just now, Nie Tian's reaction speed and power would have been more than enough to kill Jiao Qiansheng. However, how could he have done that? Even if Jiao Qiansheng had turned into a monster, he was still Nie Tian's brother. Mo Qianjun was stunned for a moment before he reacted. He pulled Nie Tian and asked nervously, Nie Tian, are you all right? I'm fine. Nie Tian looked at the wound on his chest and said in a deep voice. The wound left by Jiu Qiansheng was very strange. The blood was black, and there was a dark force flowing around it. Even though Nie Tian's martial body was strong, it took a long time for the wound to heal. Mo Qianjun was stunned when he saw that the wound on Nie Tian's chest had healed. Jiu Qiansheng's attack had been infused with powerful sealing power, yet Nie Tian had remained unscathed after being injured by it. This was very strange. Jiu Qiansheng, I'm Nie Tian. Don't you recognize me? At that moment, Nie Tian suddenly took a step forward and glared at Jiu Qiansheng as he growled in a low voice. Woo! Jiu Qiansheng seemed to be frightened. He retreated, not daring to approach Nie Tian. It seemed that Nie Tian had a power in his body that made him feel apprehensive. Jiu Qiansheng was even more shocked when he saw this. Jiu Qiansheng had lost all reason. He should not be afraid of anything. Why was he afraid of Nie Tian? Brother Mo, what's going on? Nie Tian asked Mo Qianjun after he saw that Jiu Qiansheng did not respond. Mo Qianjun sighed. After a long time, he told the whole story. Eternally Merciless had brought Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng into the Sky Sword Marshals. Eternally Merciless was one of the 7 Sky Protectors. Not only did he have the responsibility of protecting the Sky Sword Marshals, but he also had to search for geniuses from the various domains to enter the Sky Sword Marshals to cultivate. It wasn't just Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng. Nie Fenghua and Bailey Xingxue had also been brought into the Sky Sword Marshals by Eternally Merciless. It was a good thing that Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng had entered the Sky Sword Marshals. However, when they had first arrived, they had often been bullied because they were too weak. Strength reigned supreme. This was the law of survival for the Sky Sword Marshals. Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qiansheng had endured the humiliation and survived. Moreover, their strength had increased rapidly. Originally, the two of them had had a chance to grow to the 10 swords. Then, things would have been easier. However, 3 months ago, Jiu Qiansheng had been summoned by Black Serpent to carry out a secret mission. Black Serpent was one of the 100 swords, so he naturally couldn't refuse. However, not long after, Jiu Qiansheng had returned. His entire person had changed. First, he had become irritable. Then, black spots had appeared on his body. Finally, he had become like this. During this period, Mo Qianjun had gone to find Black Serpent many times to find out what had happened to Jiu Qiansheng. However, he had been beaten up by Black Serpent every time. That day, Mo Qianjun had realized that Jiu Qiansheng wouldn't live for long. Therefore, he had decided to challenge Black Serpent and take revenge for Jiu Qiansheng. Nie Tian knew everything that had happened after that. Black Serpent. Nie Tian's eyes darkened when he heard what Mo Qianjun had to say. He had practically shouted Black Serpent's name through his gritted teeth. Previously, he had killed Black Serpent with a single slash. That had been too easy for him. Compared to what Jiu Qiansheng had endured, Black Serpent had died too easily. After a while, Nie Tian became cold and looked at Mo Qianjun. So you don't know what happened to Jiu Qiansheng either? Yes. Mo Qianjun nodded. His expression was ugly as he said, back then, Black Serpent was the one who called Jiu Qiansheng away. Now that he is dead, I don't know who to look for. Han Qianxiu. Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he uttered a name cold. Black Serpent was Han Qianxiu's subordinate. Nie Tian didn't believe that Han Qianxiu didn't know about this. But Mo Qianjun looked at Nie Tian with a stiff expression. He said, Han Qianxiu is 1,000 swords. I don't care if he's 1,000 swords or Wang Jian. If he dares to touch my brother, I won't let him go. Nie Tian growled. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. He didn't care who Han Qianxiu was. Right now, saving Jiu Qiansheng was the most important thing. Not to mention Han Qianxiu, a mere 1,000 swords cultivator. Even if he were Hao Yan, Nie Tian wouldn't fear him in the slightest. Chapter 33:22. Chapter 3:17. Soul-burning curse, soul-burning curse. Nie Tian's eyes suddenly froze when he heard these 4 words. Soul-burning curse? What is that? Mo Qianjun exclaimed in horror as he looked at Nie Fenghua with a gloomy face. He didn't expect Nie Fenghua to know what was in Jiu Qianxing's body. The soul-burning curse is a kind of evil curse that contains an evil force. Those who are cursed will have their sword intent and divine sense slowly burned. Their martial body will decay bit by bit, and their divine sense will be devoured bit by bit. In the end, they will die like a rotten corpse. Nie Fenghua's face was gloomy as he said in a deep voice, "So that's how it is." Mo Qianjuan's eyes flashed with coldness after hearing Nie Fenghua's words. He said angrily, "Black Snake must have planted the soul-burning curse in Brother Jiu's body. It's not him." Nie Fenghua's eyes swept over Mo Qianjun and said, "Black Snake is just 100 swords. He's not strong enough to control the soul-burning curse. If it's not Black Snake, then who is it?" Mo Qianjuan's eyes trembled as he suppressed his anger. Black Snake is just a chess piece. There must be an expert behind him. Nie Fenghua's face was gloomy. His eyes flickered as if he was afraid of something. He knew that the soul-burning curse was not something a swordsman like the Black Serpent could master. Even the Clear Sky Sword martial arts 1,000 swords and 10,000 swords powerhouses were unable to control the god-burning ghost curse. There was a high possibility that the person behind the soul-burning curse was a sky swordsman or even a guardian. If that was the case, then it would be troublesome. In the Sky Swordsman, the Sky Guardian and the Sky Sword Slave were supreme existences. If one of them planted the soul-burning curse in Jiu Qianxing's body, then Jiu Qianxing would not be able to take revenge. Noticing Nie Fenghua's evasion, Nie Tian couldn't help but frown and ask in a deep voice, "Father, is the person behind Black Snake very powerful?" "Yes." Nie Fenghua nodded and didn't continue talking about the person behind her. Instead, she said, "The most important thing now is to think of a way to save them." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew that Nie Fenghua was intentionally avoiding him, so he didn't ask any further. Indeed, the most important thing right now was not to take revenge, but to think of a way to help Jiu Qianxing recover. But looking at Jiu Qianxing's current state, it seemed as if he was about to die. Lu Xian didn't know how to save him. "Ghost Emperor, do you have a way?" Nie Tian asked the Ghost Emperor after a moment of silence. He had no idea how to save them, so he could only ask the Ghost Emperor. After all, the Ghost Emperor was once a saint and knew a lot, so he might have a solution. The Divine Burning Ghost Curse is one of the 9 great ancient evil curses. In ancient times, someone had used the Divine Burning Ghost Curse to kill hundreds of thousands of experts whose strength was close to the peak of the Sage Realm in one night. From then on, the soul-burning ghost curse became a taboo name. The Ghost Emperor said, "I didn't expect that the Divine Burning Ghost Curse would appear in this small area of the sky." So the Divine Burning Ghost Curse is one of the 9 great ancient evil curses. No wonder it's so overbearing. Nie Tian's eyes flickered. He hadn't expected the Divine Burning Ghost Curse to have such a background. The person who cast the Divine Burning Ghost Curse on your friend is still very weak. It should only be a level 1 ghost curse. Otherwise, your friend would have died a long time ago. The Ghost Emperor's face was gloomy as he continued. "If your friend had been cursed, I would still have a way to save him. But now, he can only wait for death." "Wait for death?" Nie Tian's eyes trembled and his face stiffened when he heard this. He and Jiu Qianxing were sworn brothers. The two of them had finally met, so how could he just watch the latter wait for death? "Nie Tian, your friend has already become a corpse-eating ghost slave. His situation will only get worse in the future. In the end, he will become a skeleton. If you want him to die a better death, kill him now," the Ghost Emperor said coldly. Corpse-eating ghost slave was Jiu Qianxing's current state. The reason Jiu Qianxing was still alive was because Mo Qianjun had been feeding him beast corpses. Otherwise, Jiu Qianxing would have died a long time ago. The corpse-eating ghost slave was the state a martialist would be in after their consciousness was completely burned by the Divine Burning Ghost Curse. The corpse-eating ghost slave had already lost its consciousness. It only had the most basic desire to eat, and it was only interested in corpses. No way. Nie Tian suddenly came to his senses, and with a low growl, refused decisively. He didn't believe that there was no way to save Jiu Qiansheng. Nie Tian. Nie Fenghua looked at Nie Tian and said, Jiu Qiansheng can no longer be saved. The best outcome for him now is to be killed by us. This. Mo Qianjun was stunned for a moment and couldn't say a word. His eyes were clearly moist. In his heart, he had already prepared for the worst. But Nie Fenghua had said it so bluntly. It was hard for him to accept. Nie Tian's face was gloomy, and his expression was so gloomy that it was frightening. Nie Tian, perhaps this emperor has a way. At this time, a pleasantly surprised voice rang out. It was the Saint Spirit Blood Seal Lulu. Lulu had been helping Nie Tian refine the heaven punishment power, so he rarely spoke. What way? Nie Tian's eyes trembled, and he cried out in surprise. He was like a drowning man who had suddenly found a life-saving straw. The heaven punishment power. Lulu paused for a moment and said in a deep voice, The heaven punishment power? Nie Tian was stunned. He asked in surprise, The heaven punishment power can save Jiu Qiansheng. Perhaps it can, but this emperor isn't sure. Lulu was unsure. He said, When you approached him just now, this emperor felt that the heaven punishment power seemed to be suppressing the curse power in his body. Nie Tian exclaimed in surprise. His eyes flickered as if he had seen hope. Indeed, when he approached Jiu Qiansheng, the latter seemed to be afraid and involuntarily retreated. It was very strange. Logically speaking, a person who had completely lost his mind would not be afraid of anything. If that's the case, there's a chance. At this time, the Ghost Emperor's eyes flashed with a strange light. He said, If the heaven punishment power can really suppress the divine burning ghost curse, then we can first use the heaven punishment power to force out the divine burning ghost curse power in his body. Then, we can use the power of the heavenly Tao to help him slowly recover his divine sense. As long as his divine sense recovers, his martial body might recover. All right, let's do that. Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he nodded his head. Since there was a chance to save Jiu Qiansheng, he naturally would not hesitate. Next, Nie Tian used half a day to slightly recover before he prepared to save Jiu Qiansheng. Phew! He arrived in front of Jiu Qiansheng and let out a long breath to relieve his nervousness. The current Jiu Qiansheng was too weak, and the heaven punishment power was too violent. If he was not careful, he could be instantly killed. Nie Tian did not have a deep understanding of the heaven punishment power, so he had to be very careful when saving Jiu Qiansheng. Nie Tian, are you ready? At this time, Liu Yu's voice sounded. He was ready to release the heaven punishment power. Nie Tian had gone through 3 heaven punishment tempering sessions, so he had only absorbed a small portion of the heaven punishment power. Most of the heaven punishment power was stored with Lulu. Chapter 33:23. 10,000 Sword Mountain Boom. The power of the heavenly punishment continued to pour out. At the same time, the power of the stars seeped into it, calming the violent aura. Jiu Qiansheng wanted to retreat, but he didn't have enough time. His entire body was instantly enveloped by the power of the heavenly punishment. Roar! The power of heaven's punishment entered his body, forcefully suppressing the power of the soul-burning ghost curse. Jiu Qiansheng howled in pain, his voice echoing through the void, shrill and piercing. Nie Tian narrowed his eyes and turned to look at Mo Qianjun. Mo Qianjun understood and released his sword will to seal the entire valley. Jiu Qiansheng's cries were too loud. If the valley wasn't sealed off, it would have alarmed many people. Nie Tian looked at Jiu Qiansheng, who was in extreme pain, but his face was gloomy. He didn't stop. Instead, he unleashed the power of heaven's punishment even more violently. This was Jiu Qiansheng's only chance. No matter how much pain he had to endure, Nie Tian had to continue. Then, an even more mournful scream reverberated in the valley, making one's heart tremble. Crack, crack, crack. A moment later, Jiu Qiansheng's body seemed to be unable to withstand the pressure of the heavenly punishment, and his bones actually began to crack bit by bit. "Oh no!" the ghost monarch exclaimed. It was obvious that Jiu Qiansheng could not take it anymore. If this continued, his body would explode. Shackles of the heavenly Tao break. At that moment, Niet Tian's expression darkened. Shackles of the Tao of the heavens surged out of his body, and they shot toward Jiu Qiansheng like wild snakes. The ghost emperor's expression flickered as he exclaimed, "Niet Tian, are you insane?" Jiu Qiansheng couldn't take it anymore, but Niet Tian was still going to use the power of the heavenly Tao shackles. Wasn't he just going to kill Jiu Qiansheng? This is his only chance. I can't give it up. Niet Tian's eyes trembled as he growled like a wild beast. Following this, streams of blood suddenly burst out from the tip of his finger and soaked into the heavenly Tao shackles. Then, the heavenly shackles released blood-colored runes that attached themselves to Jiu Qiansheng's body. Niet Tian used his own blood energy to fuse with the power of the heavenly Tao to maintain the stability of Jiu Qiansheng's martial body. Boom! Following which, he released the power of the heavenly punishment and the power of the stars even more frantically, slowly seeping into Jiu Qiansheng's body. Jiu Qiansheng fainted under the immense pain. His aura was extremely weak, and it was concealed by the power of heaven's punishment. 99976. At this moment, he didn't have the time to check on Jiu Qiansheng's fate, and he could only forcefully force out the soul incineration curse within the latter's body. After a long while, Jiu Qiansheng's body released waves of black qi. The qi was sinister and extremely poisonous. It was the soul-burning curse. Niet Tian had forced the god-burning curse out of Jiu Qiansheng's body with heavenly punishment power and star power. 964 MO 1006 666 1017 and 668 million 7-inch 6 and Monarch in 6,000 time. Sheng time. Only then did he realize that Niet Tian was already drenched in sweat, and his face was as pale as a sheet. Niet Tian hadn't fully recovered to begin with, and forcibly using the power of the heavenly beheader had put great pressure on him. Adding the fact that he had used the Tao of Heaven's shackles and consumed a large amount of flesh power, he was on the verge of collapsing. "I'm fine." Niet Tian took a deep breath to steady himself. He waved his hand and said, "Go check on Jiu Qian." "Okay." Mo Qianjun answered and went to Jiu Qiansheng. The latter was unconscious, but his breath was still there. It was weak but stable. "He's fine now." Mo Qianjun was overjoyed when he sensed that thousand no longer had the aura of the spirit-burning curse. He looked at Niet Tian with tears in his eyes. It was hard to imagine that Niet Tian had successfully forced the spirit-burning curse out of Jiu Qiansheng's body. One had to admit that Niet Tian was a madman who dared to take risks. If he had stopped just now, Jiu Qiansheng might have died. If Niet Tian had not used the heavenly Tao shackles and blood to stabilize Jiu Qiansheng's body, he would have died. Niet Tian let out a long breath of turbid air, feeling as if a huge rock that had been hanging over his heart had finally been lifted. Nie Fenghua also heaved a sigh of relief. She looked at Niet Tian and nodded. For Niet Tian, that moment was more terrifying than a life-and-death battle. If he had failed to save Jiu Qiansheng, he would have regretted it for the rest of his life. Then, Niet Tian rested for a while, and his pale face finally looked a little better. "Niet Tian, your friend is fine for now. Let me show you the sky sword martialism." Nie Fenghua came to Niet Tian's side and said. Niet Tian nodded and smiled. Yeah, that was exactly what he was planning to do. He had just come to the sky sword martialism and was unfamiliar with everything here. He needed to learn more about it. "Brother Mo, please stay here and take care of Brother Jiu. Father, and I will look around." Niet Tian turned to Mo Qianjun and said with a smile. Then, he left the valley with Nie Fenghua. I didn't expect Lord Nie Qianjian to be Brother Nie's father. Mo Qianjun looked at the place where Nie Fenghua and Niet Tian disappeared. He could not help but laugh and murmured. Mo Qianjun was no stranger to Nie Fenghua, because the former was a thousand sword. There were not many thousand swordsmen in the sky sword martialism. It was not strange that Mo Qianjun knew Nie Fenghua, but he never expected Nie Fenghua to be Nie Feng's father. After Nie Tian and Nie Fenghua left the valley, they came to a high altitude. So the sky sword martialism is so big. Nie Tian looked down at the endless mountain range and could not help but exclaim, Nie Tian, this is only a part of the sky sword martialism. The entire sky sword martialism is much bigger than what you see. Nie Fenghua smiled and said, this is a world of swordsmen. Everything here exists for swordsmen. Okay, Nie Tian nodded. When he first entered the sky sword martialism, he had already felt that the space here was filled with a strong sword intent. This sword intent was very useful for swordsman's cultivation. Father, what are those sword shadows? At this moment, Nie Tian discovered something strange. His expression changed as he pointed to the void and asked. The mountain range below was very strange. There was a huge sword shadow floating above each peak. The sword shadows released a strong aura of sword intent in the void. In fact, when Nie Tian first arrived at the sky sword martialism, he had already noticed the sword shadows in the air. However, he did not look carefully at the time. It turned out that there were sword shadows floating above each peak. At this moment, he looked down from the sky and saw that there were thousands of sword shadows in the sky. They were like giants standing on the sky. It was a shocking sight. That's the Sword Mountain, the myriad layers Sword Mountain. Nie Fenghua's eyes narrowed as he looked at the sword shadows. His expression turned grave. Chapter 33:24. A day's slave, the myriad Sword Mountain. This name shocked Nie Tian inexplicably. Sword shadows hung upside down in the air like mountains, giving off a majestic and surging aura. However, Nie Tian didn't understand how the sword shadows were formed. It was as if there was a close connection between the sword shadows and the mountains below them. Nie Tian, do you know about spiritual veins? Nie Fenghua noticed Nie Tian's confusion and asked with a faint smile. Yes. Nie Tian nodded. Of course he knew about spiritual energy earth veins. They were earth veins formed by the spiritual energy that was nurtured by heaven and earth, and contained enormous amounts of spiritual energy. However, spiritual veins were things of planes, so realms wouldn't care about them. Spiritual veins are nurtured by heaven and earth. The myriad Sword Mountain is also nurtured by heaven and earth. Nie Fenghua solemnly nodded and said, it's just that the spiritual chi earth vein contains an enormous amount of spiritual chi of heaven and earth, while the myriad layer Sword Mountain contains an enormous sword intent. Upon hearing Nie Fenghua's words, Nie Tian's eyes couldn't help but tremble as he exclaimed, sword intent born from heaven and earth. He never thought that heaven and earth could nurture sword intent. Yes. Nie Fenghua glanced at Nie Tian and nodded. You can think of the myriad Sword Mountain as a heaven and earth sword vein, just like a heaven and earth sacred vein. Heaven and earth sacred vein. Heaven and earth sword vein. Nie Tian's eyes flickered. The shock in his heart was indescribable. It turned out that the myriad Sword Mountain was a sword vein nurtured by heaven and earth, just like a heaven and earth sacred vein. He had seen a heaven and earth sacred vein not long ago in the Tianqing realm. The difference was that a heaven and earth sacred vein contained sacred energy, while a heaven and earth sword vein contained sword intent. Thinking about it, the existence of the myriad Sword Mountain wasn't strange at all. Many cultivators had Xiantian sword veins in their bodies that were nurtured by heaven and earth. Moreover, if a Xiantian sacred array and a Xiantian martial vein existed, then the myriad Sword Mountain would also exist. Nie Tian, the sword shadow you see is formed by the sword shadow in the Sword Mountain below. After a while, after waiting for Nie Tian to calm down a little, Nie Fenghua continued. The Sword Mountain contains an enormous sword intent. The bigger the sword shadow, the more sword intent there is in the mountain range. So that's how it is. Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he understood. He had long discovered that every sword shadow in the void was different in size, and their sword intent and aura were also different. The sword shadow in the air was like a projection of the sword intent in the sword mountain, representing how much sword intent was contained in the mountain. Father, those sword shadows are very big, but the sword intent aura is very weak. What's going on? At this moment, Niefeng discovered that something was wrong and asked curiously. Some of the sword shadows were huge, but the sword intent aura was very weak, which was strange. That's a sword mountain that has been mined by swordsmen. Of course, the sword intent is weak. Nie Fenghua laughed bitterly, his expression somewhat ugly. My! Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. He didn't quite understand what Nie Fenghua meant. Nie Tian, do you know why the Sky Guardians gathered so many genius swordsmen into the sword marshals in the sky? Nie Fenghua's lips twitched as he asked with a bitter smile. I don't know. Nie Tian furrowed his brows and shook his head. Actually, we're here to be sword slaves. Nie Fenghua shook his head and smiled. Our purpose is to stimulate the sword intent in the myriad sword mountain and condense the sword intent into sword crystals. Sword crystals? Nie Tian's eyes suddenly trembled when he heard Nie Fenghua's words. He seemed to have understood something. The myriad sword mountain contained an enormous sword intent, and the swordsmen here were like slaves, excavating the sword intent in the mountain. It was similar to being a miner, except that miner excavated while sword slaves excavated sword intent. The sword crystals condensed by the swordsmen have to be handed over. They're not allowed to keep it for themselves. Nie Fenghua smiled bitterly and continued. Eternally Merciless told me that these sword crystals will eventually be handed over to the master of the sword marshals in the sky and circulated in various sacred worlds. So that's how it is. Yet Tian's eyes trembled as he clenched his fists. He finally understood that the so-called sword marshals in the sky was actually a huge mine. However, this mine extracted sword intent and sword crystals. The sword crystals excavated from the myriad sword mountain are extremely popular in the sacred world. Swordsmen who fuse with the sword crystals can directly increase their sword Dao. Nie Fenghua's lips twitched as he said helplessly. The sword crystals were condensed from sword intent. Moreover, it was sword intent nurtured by the world, so it was naturally beneficial to the swordsman. We can't even use the sword intent that we excavated and condensed into sword crystals. Nie Tian's eyes were surging with anger as he said, These people really treat us as slaves. You can't say that. Nie Fenghua furrowed his brows and said, Actually, most people are very willing to be sword slaves here because they can comprehend and absorb the sword intent of the world when they excavate sword intent. It's very beneficial to the swordsman. Take me and Bailey Xingxue as an example. If we didn't practice the sword marshals in the sky, our sword Dao wouldn't be this strong. Nie Tian took a deep breath and calmed himself down before he said, Even so, we don't even have the right to use the sword crystals. Isn't that too depressing? Is that considered depressing? Nie Fenghua's lips twitched as he smiled and said, There's a saying among the sword marshals in the sky, once a slave, forever a slave. The cruelest thing about the sword marshals in the sky is that once we come here, there's almost no chance for us to leave. We can only continue to excavate sword intent and die in the sword marshals in the sky. Nie Tian's eyes widened as he went blank. Why? Nie Fenghua and Bailey Xingxue had both left the sword marshals in the sky, so it didn't seem too difficult for them to leave. Nie Tian, you will soon understand why. But I believe that you can leave the sword marshals in the sky. Nie Fenghua looked at Nie Tian with determination and helplessness. Father, you don't want me to come to the clear sky, sword martial arts, right? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed as he saw something and asked in a deep voice. Nie Fenghua's eyes trembled. He was clearly avoiding Nie Tian. After a long time, he finally said, It was Eternally Merciless who asked you to come to the sword marshals in the sky. He used the entire Nie clan to threaten me that you must come to the sky. Nie Tian's expression was very unsightly. Nie Fenghua didn't want Nie Tian to enter the sword marshals in the sky. The one who really wanted Nie Tian to come was Eternally Merciless. Why did Eternally Merciless insist on letting Nie Tian enter the sword marshals in the sky? Eternally Merciless used the entire Nye clan to threaten Nye Fenghua, so the latter had no choice but to do so. With Eternally Merciless strength, not to mention the Nye clan, even destroying the 9 regions would be a piece of cake. But what Nye Tian didn't understand was why Eternally Merciless wanted him to come here. After a while, Nye Tian became much colder. He suddenly looked at Nye Fenghua and asked, "Father, what is Eternally Merciless strength?" "Nye Tian, what is the highest realm of the sword Tao that you know of?" Nye Fenghua's eyes darkened as he asked. "Transcendent profoundness." Nye Tian nodded and answered truthfully. The realm of the sword Tao that he knew of was the transcendent profoundness, one of the 3 transcendent profoundness realms. "I don't know about Eternally Merciless martial arts cultivation." Nye Fenghua sighed softly and said, "But his sword Tao realm is definitely at the Sage realm." Sage realm sword Tao. When Yatan heard these words, his pupils shrank, and he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Chapter 33:25. Sage realm sword Tao. When Yetian heard Nye Fenghua suddenly mention the Sage realm sword Tao, his eyes couldn't help but tremble and instantly became extremely passionate. He really wanted to know what the realm of the sword Tao above the transcendence profoundness was. The Sage realm sword Tao is divided into 6 sword realms: sword rhythm, oracle, sacred meaning, sword of heavenly calamity, sword of God-defying, sword of martial saint. Nye Fenghua looked at Nye Tian and said in a deep voice, "The perception between each realm of the 6 sword realms is like the difference between heaven and earth. Moreover, each sword realm is further divided into 9 layers, from the first layer to the 9th layer. It's no exaggeration to say that between each sword realm, there's a world of difference, and each layer is a suppression." "Yes." Nye Tian's eyes shone as he murmured, "Sword rhythm, oracle, sacred meaning, sword of heavenly calamity, sword of God-defying, sword of martial saint. I'll remember the 6 sword realms." Nye Fenghua nodded slightly as she looked at Nye Tian with blazing expectation in her eyes. QL11 to Nye Tian. The path of the sword Tao was still far away, but Nye Tian could definitely reach the peak of the sword Tao. "Father, what realm is Eternally Merciless sword Tao at?" Nye Tian became cold and couldn't help but ask. He really wanted to know what realm a swordsman like Eternally Merciless had reached in the sword Tao. "Eternally Merciless should be at the sacred meaning realm, but I'm not sure about the specific realm." Nye Fenghua frowned and said in a deep voice, "He once told me that the first 3 of the 6 sword realms belong to the mortal sage realm, and the last 3 belong to the paragon sage realm. Ordinary geniuses of the sword Tao can reach the mortal sage realm, but only an extremely small number of monstrous swordsmen can reach the paragon sage realm. Even in the saint's world, there are only a handful of swordsmen who can reach saint ruler," said Jianchen. "The mortal saint realm, the utmost saint realm." Nye Tian frowned and muttered, "It seems that the 3 realms of sword aura, divine oracle, and holy meaning belong to the mortal saint realm, while the 3 realms of sword tribulation, God-defying sword perception, and saint defire belong to the paragon saint realm. Eternally Merciless is at the sage realm, which is the peak of the mortal sage realm." Nye Tian muttered to himself as a blazing light appeared in his eyes. With Eternally Merciless talent, he had only reached the saint realm. It was hard to imagine what kind of swordsman could step into the saint realm. Afterwards, Nye Tian narrowed his eyes slightly and asked Nye Fenghua, "Father, in other words, Eternally Merciless isn't someone from this world, but a swordsman from the saint's world, right?" "Yes." Nye Fenghua nodded and said, "Eternally Merciless guards the sword martialism in the sky. He seems to be fulfilling a certain mission, so he's someone from the saint's world. No wonder he was so stunning when he appeared in the myriad regions, and no one knows about his past." Nye Tian's lips twitched as he murmured, "Speaking of which, Eternally Merciless has helped me a lot. If it weren't for him back then, I might have already died." Nye Fenghua furrowed his brows, and his eyes flickered as he recalled the events of the past. Back then, he was chased out of the Holy Soul Academy by Kuyo Onaguchi and was heavily injured. Coincidentally, he met Eternally Merciless, and it was the latter who saved him. However, Eternally Merciless clearly had a motive for saving him. But no matter what, Eternally Merciless had saved him. This point Nie Fenghua, would never forget. Even after that, Nie Fenghua had left the Sky Sword martialism several times because of Eternally Merciless' help. It was as if Eternally Merciless had been exceptionally lenient towards him. It was just that Eternally Merciless was very firm on the matter of Niet Tian entering the Sky Sword martialism. He definitely had to let Niet Tian enter the Sky Sword martialism, and he did not even hesitate to use the Nie family to threaten Nie Fenghua. Eternally Merciless is a senior of the Way of the Sword. I respect his strength, and I also respect him for saving my father and me several times. Nie Tian looked at Nie Fenghua and said in a deep voice, "But we are not puppets that can be controlled by anyone. No one can control our fate, not even Eternally Merciless. Fate must be in our own hands." Yes. Nie Fenghua looked at Nie Tian and could feel the determination in the latter's eyes. He could not help but be moved and nodded heavily. Nie Tian's eyes flickered with a sharp light. It was not that he could not distinguish between gratitude and grudges. On the contrary, he could clearly distinguish between gratitude and grudges. He clearly remembered what Eternally Merciless had said when he had first met him. At that time, Nie Fenghua had been seriously injured. Eternally Merciless had said to Nie Tian, "Nie Fenghua owes me a lot. I helped him, but it seemed that he would not have the chance to help me." Nie Tian's reply to Eternally Merciless had been, "Senior, no matter what my father owes you, I will repay it for him." It was only right and proper for a son to repay his father's debts. It was normal for Nie Fenghua to feel that he owed Eternally Merciless in his heart. If Nie Fenghua could not repay it, it was normal for his son, Nie Tian, to repay it. But if Eternally Merciless felt that he could control Nie Fenghua and Nie Tian in this way, then it was not normal. Nie Tian had saved many people in the past, but he had never forced others to repay it. From Nie Tian's point of view, whether to save or not to save, the choice was in the hands of the person who saved. If you save someone but ask for repayment, then you were not saving someone but making a deal. Nie Tian was grateful for everything Eternally Merciless had done, but he would definitely not be controlled by Eternally Merciless. "Father, I want to see Senior Eternally Merciless." After thinking for a while, Nie Tian said to Nie Fenghua. He wanted to find out what Eternally Merciless wanted to do. "The Sword Seal in the Sky will open in a month. The 7 Guardians of the Sky are currently busy with the opening of the Sword Seal in the Sky. Before the Sword Seal in the Sky opens, Eternally Merciless will not appear." Nie Fenghua frowned and said solemnly, "So that's how it is." Nie Tian nodded slightly. He could only wait until the Sword Seal in the Sky opened before going to see Eternally Merciless. Vaguely, he had a feeling that the reason why Eternally Merciless allowed him to enter the Sky Sword Martial should be related to the opening of the Sword Seal in the Sky. Nie Tian, your current level of the Sword Dao should be the Transcendent Sword Spirit, right? At this time, Nie Fenghua looked at Nie Tian and suddenly asked. "Yes." Nie Tian nodded and answered truthfully, "I have just entered the Transcendent Sword Spirit realm, so I should still be in the early stages." "You are already at the peak of the Transcendent Sword Spirit realm." Nie Fenghua's divine sense swept across Nie Tian's body. She laughed and said, "Transcendent Sword Spirit, Transcendent Sword Body, and the 3 realms of Transcendent Ultimacy are originally the transition stage of the Divine Realm Sword Dao to the Saint Realm Sword Dao. The so-called early, middle, late, and peak divisions are all man-made. The improvement of your sword intent is different from that of ordinary swordsmen. If I'm not wrong, your sword intent is a combination of many sword intents, and it has also integrated the power of your bloodline. And there are even other powers, right?" "Yes." Nie Tian nodded, amazed by Nie Fenghua's perception ability. His Godfiend sword intent was formed by the Proud sword intent, the Star sword intent, the Thunderbolt sword intent, the Soul-devouring sword intent, the 3 evil sword intent, and several other sword intents. Moreover, when the God-Fiend Sword Intent was released, it could also integrate other powers, including Dragon Chi, Supreme Demon Fire, Heavenly Energy, and even the power of the Divine Evolution Saint Soul. With so many powers fused together, Nietion's sword intent far surpassed that of a swordsman of the same level. Sword intent is originally pure, and it is a slow process of accumulation. However, your sword intent's speed of improvement far exceeds that of ordinary people, and it is extremely inclusive. Nie Fenghua's eyes narrowed as she said, "Moreover, in your sword intent, I can sense an aura that is even more terrifying than ordinary saint energy. Perhaps it is this power that makes your sword intent different from others." Chapter 33:26. Breakthrough in Sword Dao. Nietion was slightly shocked. He didn't expect Nie Fenghua's perception to be so strong. He had merged with the natal star rune of the previous astral sacred lord, Dong Wang Zhengrong, which concealed the aura of the astral energy. Even if he used the astral energy, others wouldn't be able to sense the existence of the astral energy. However, Nie Fenghua could only sense the existence of the astral energy, but he didn't know what it was. The astral energy was the origin of force, and it could contain all kinds of energy. Because of the astral energy, Nietion's sword intent could easily merge with other energies. "Nietion, I have something for you." Suddenly, Nie Fenghua revealed a strange smile and took out a transparent crystal. It was only the size of a thumb, but it emitted a strong aura of sword intent. "This is..." Nietion's eyes trembled as he looked at the transparent crystal. He sensed that this small crystal contained an extremely powerful sword will. It was as if this crystal was condensed from sword will. In the next moment, Nietion's eyes trembled and his face stiffened. Could this be a sword crystal? Sword crystal was a crystal formed from the sword intent of a sword slave from the Myriad Sword Mountain. The purpose of a sword slave's existence was to mine sword crystals. The crystal in Nie Fenghua's hand had a strong sword intent aura. It was clearly a sword crystal. However, Nie Fenghua had mentioned that all the crystals obtained from the Myriad Sword Mountain had to be handed over to the Guardian. This was the rule of the sword martialism in the sky. If this was a sword crystal, wouldn't Nie Fenghua have violated the rule of the sword martialism in the sky? "Nietion, don't be nervous. The crystal in my hand is indeed a sword crystal. However, this sword crystal was given to me by Merciless, eternally merciless. I've never used it, so I'm giving it to you now." Nie Fenghua smiled and handed the sword crystal over. Nietion went blank for a moment before hastily saying, "Father, you should keep this sword crystal." How could he not see that Nie Fenghua had been saving the sword crystal and had never been willing to use it? We're father and son. There's no need to be so polite. Nie Fenghua forced a smile and said, "Furthermore, it will be difficult for me to recover from my current state in a short period of time. I can't fuse with the sword crystal at all. The sword seal in the sky will open in a month. If you fuse with this sword crystal, you might be able to improve your sword Dao realm again." Nietion frowned, his divine sense probing Nie Fenghua's body. The latter's martial body was indeed very weak. From the looks of it, the backlash from the sword seal had caused great damage to Nie Fenghua's martial body. After a moment of pondering, Nietion accepted the sword crystal and said, "All right." After coming to the Sky Sword Martial list and seeing so many Sword Dao experts, he had a strong desire to become stronger. Furthermore, although the Sky Sword Martial seemed calm, it was actually extremely cruel. Mo Qianjun and Zhou Qiansheng's experiences were proof enough. If Nietion didn't have great power, he wouldn't even be able to survive, let alone protect others. "Nietion, you can slowly stimulate the sword intent in the sword crystal, then slowly absorb it and transform it into..." Nie Fenghua said to Nietion with a smile. However, before he could finish speaking, his whole body froze. Nietion took the sword crystal, raised his head, and swallowed it. He hadn't seen it wrong. Nietion had really swallowed the sword crystal. "Nietion, you..." Nie Fenghua's eyes trembled. He was so shocked that he couldn't speak. The The sword crystal contained an extremely violent sword intent. It was like a beast core, and it had a great impact on a warrior's martial body. Would Tian really be fine swallowing the sword crystal like that? Father, don't worry. I'll be fine. Tian smiled faintly. However, as soon as he finished speaking, his face suddenly stiffened. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead, and his face contorted in pain. Tian, are you okay? Nie Fenghua's eyes trembled. He was really afraid that Tian would explode and die in the next moment. This kind of thing wasn't unheard of. Some sword slaves wanted to hide the sword crystal, but they were afraid of being discovered, so they swallowed it. However, they couldn't bear the power of the sword crystal and died in the end. Tian's current situation wouldn't be the same as those people, right? I'm fine. Tian endured the great pain and spoke with difficulty. He hadn't expected that the sword crystal would be so powerful. The moment the sword crystal entered his body, a burst of sword intent erupted. It was like a broken dam, and it crazily attacked his martial body as if it wanted to break it. Tian, focus and fuse the power of the stars with the sword crystal. At this moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice sounded out. Okay. Tian answered and began to release the power of the stars to fuse with the sword crystal's sword intent. The sword intent was born from the heavens and earth, and it had an extremely violent aura. However, with the power of the stars as a buffer, the violent sword intent gradually stabilized and began to slowly fuse with the power of the stars. At this moment, Tian's aura stabilized, and he became much calmer. He could feel the sword intent in his body skyrocketing, giving him a feeling that his power was about to explode. The sword intent contained in the sword crystal was being absorbed by Tian, causing his sword intent to skyrocket. This, Nie Fenghua looked at Tian in front of him, and he couldn't believe his eyes. He was dumbfounded, and his mouth was wide open, but he couldn't say a word. He couldn't imagine that Tian's martial body was so terrifying that he could absorb and fuse with the power of the sword crystal in an instant. The sword intent in the sword crystal was so violent that even the 6 experts in the sky couldn't absorb it in an instant. Next, Tian sat cross-legged as if he had entered a state of cultivation. His aura was calm, and he steadily fused with the power of the sword crystal. Nie Fenghua was very nervous. He stayed by Tian's side, sensing Tian's aura at all times. He didn't dare to be careless. Soon, 3 days had passed. Boom! Tian suddenly opened his eyes, and a terrifying sword aura erupted from his body. It soared into the sky, and it was incomparably vigorous, making him look like a sharp sword that lay across the heavens and the earth. Tian. Nie Fenghua looked at Tian, and his eyes trembled. He took a step forward, and his face froze again when he felt the aura of the latter's sword intent. He couldn't believe that Tian had actually made a breakthrough in the way of the sword. At this moment, Tian had already broken through from the transcendent soul realm to the transcendent sword body realm. 3 days. In just 3 days, Tian had fused with the sword crystal and directly achieved a breakthrough in the way of the sword. It was too terrifying. One had to know that even swordsmen at the level of the 6th great sky needed several months to completely fuse with the sword crystal. Moreover, the sword crystal that Tian had fused with was the 10,000-layer sword crystal. The sword intent within it was extremely powerful. It was unimaginable how powerful Tian's martial body was, and how terrifying the power contained within his body was. The sword crystal is indeed a good thing. Tian's gaze was extremely sharp, and the corner of his mouth twitched as he muttered. He was also very surprised that a small sword crystal had actually helped him break through to the transcendent sword body realm. Actually, the reason why he was able to absorb the sword crystal's power so quickly was not only because of the power of the stars, but also because of the heavenly Tao formation within his body. The sword crystal contained the sword intent that was born from the world, and it was compatible with the power of the heavens. Tian's body was already filled with heavenly energy, so it was much easier to fuse with the sword intent of the heaven and earth. With the transcendent Sword Body realm, I have taken another step towards the Saint Realm Sword Tao. The breakthrough in the way of the sword made Nyat Tian extremely happy. Chapter 33:27. 3,000 Heavenly Tao. 3,000 Heavenly Tao. The Heavenly Tao runes on the Heavenly Tao shackles have become active. Nyat Tian was shocked as he inspected his martial body. The 9 Heavenly Tao shackles in his body were engraved with Heavenly Tao runes. The Heavenly Tao runes were very calm before, but they had become active now. It's the sword intent of the heaven and earth inside the sword crystal. It has activated the Heavenly Tao runes. The Heavenly Tao runes seem to be unsealed. The Ghost Emperor's eyes trembled as he exclaimed excitedly, "The Heavenly Tao runes are unsealed?" Nyat Tian was startled. He had to admit that even though he had the Heavenly Tao force and the Heavenly Tao shackles in his body, he had no idea what they were, nor did he know what the Heavenly Tao runes on the Heavenly Tao shackles were. How could he not be surprised when the Ghost Emperor suddenly said that the Heavenly Tao runes were unsealed? Could it be that the Heavenly Tao runes on the Heavenly Tao shackles were some kind of seal? Bang, bang, bang. At that moment, a series of explosions came from the Heavenly Tao shackles. The Heavenly Tao runes were unsealed. At this moment, Nyat Tian felt that his body was filled with a mysterious aura, which flowed through his body like a gurgling stream, making him feel extremely comfortable. It was as if all the pores in his body had been opened, and his body was free, without any restraints or restraints. The heavens and earth were boundless, and the universe was vast. It was as if the entire world was an illusion. The man was the heavens and earth, and the heavens and earth were the man. However, after a while, the Heavenly Tao runes stopped unsealing, and the mysterious aura disappeared. Nyat Tian was shocked, and it took him a long time to recover his composure. At that moment, Nyat Tian seemed to have sensed something. His eyes flickered, and he was so shocked that he couldn't speak a word. At that moment, he felt that his martial physique was extremely comfortable. It had completely recovered, and his condition had returned to its peak. He was seriously injured previously, and it would take him at least 10 days to recover. However, he had miraculously recovered now. It's the power of the Heavenly Tao runes. Nyat Tian reacted in the next second, and his eyes flickered with astonishment. Before the Heavenly Tao runes were unsealed, his martial body had not recovered. However, after the Heavenly Tao runes were unsealed, his martial body had actually recovered. This undoubtedly meant that it was the power of the heavenly runes that allowed his martial physique to recover instantly. Ghost Emperor, just what kind of power does the Heavenly Tao rune have? It's so terrifying. Nyat Tian's eyes trembled as he asked the Ghost Emperor. This emperor doesn't know either. The Heavenly Tao shackles and Heavenly Tao runes are both powers that originate from the Heavenly Tao Sacred Heart. They should be the highest level of sacred power. The Ghost Emperor frowned and said, "When the Heavenly Tao runes were unsealed, I sensed that there were 3,000 Heavenly Tao runes on each of the Heavenly Tao shackles. You only unsealed 1,000th of them. 3,000 Heaven Tao runes." Nyat Tian's eyes flickered with astonishment after hearing the Ghost Monarch's words. "Yes." The Ghost Emperor nodded and said, "There are 9 Heavenly Tao shackles in your body. 3 Heavenly Tao runes have been unsealed for each shackle. That's a total of 27 Heavenly Tao runes." Nyat Tian's eyes narrowed as he was even more astonished. Just 27 Heavenly Tao runes were enough to allow his martial physique to recover in an instant. How terrifying would it be if all the Heavenly Tao runes were unsealed? The unsealing of the Heavenly Tao runes has greatly improved your martial physique. Your martial physique should be even stronger than before. The Ghost Emperor's eyes flickered as he said in a deep voice, "Mm." Nyat Tian nodded as his lips curled into a smile. He had long sensed that his martial physique was much stronger than before. "Nyat Tian, you've recovered?" At this time, Nie Fenghua, who had been stunned into a daze, finally came to her senses. Her eyes were slightly trembling, and her face was filled with disbelief as she looked at Nietion. He even suspected that he had sensed wrongly. Nietion's martial physique had fully recovered. But how was that possible? Nietion was clearly severely injured before. At this moment, Nie Fenghua finally realized that the son in front of him had a hidden power that he could not comprehend. Yeah, the corner of Nietion's mouth curled up into a faint smile. Nie Fenghua's eyes trembled a few times before he nodded and accepted the facts in front of him. Father, I have to go back immediately to see how Mo, Qianjun, and the others are doing. Nietion immediately said as he suddenly thought of Mo, Qianjun, and Jiu Qinsheng. I also have some matters to attend to. If you need anything, come to the Nine Sword Arena to find me. Nie Fenghua nodded and did not stay any longer. He had the identity of 1,000 swords in the sky, sword marshal, 3 heavens. There were indeed many matters waiting for him to attend to when he returned to the sky, sword marshal, 3 heavens. Father, I won't let you down. Nietion looked at Nie Fenghua's disappearing figure and muttered to himself with a firm look in his eyes. Then, he moved and flew toward the valley where Mo, Qianjun was. A moment later, Nietion arrived outside the valley. He directly stepped into the valley. However, his expression changed and his heart sank. Mo Qianjun and Jiu Qinsheng were not in the valley. Oh no! Nietion's expression was terrifyingly gloomy. He felt inexplicably uneasy. Mo Qianjun should be in the valley taking care of Jiu Qinsheng. Why were the 2 of them missing? Even if Mo Qianjun had something to attend to, he should not have brought Jiu Qinsheng with him. Go and find them, Nietion roared. Then his figure moved. He took a step and soared into the sky like a flood dragon. He looked down from high in the sky and spread out his divine sense to sense the auras of Mo, Qianjun, and Jiu Qinsheng. At this moment, he saw many martial artists surrounding the sword shadows in the sky. They were all attacking the sword shadows and activating the sword intent in the sword shadows. Such a scene was no different from a minesweeper working hard in a mine. In fact, Nietion even saw some overseers watching from the side. If they found the sword slave displeasing to the eye, they would directly send a stream of sword intent over, leaving behind a bloody scar. Could it be that Brother Mo and Brother Juqian also went to mine the sword intent? Nietion frowned, and his heart sank. Mo Qianjun was still fine, but how could Jiu Qinsheng go and mine the sword intent in his current state? Nietion grew anxious. His astral soul wings appeared on his back, and he increased his speed to search for Mo, Qianjun, and Jiu Qinsheng. The sword mountain in front of Nietion was clearly divided into 9 regions. In other words, there were 9 sword grounds. After half a day, Nietion searched all 9 sword grounds, but he still couldn't find Mo, Qianjun, and Jiu Qinsheng. Where did they go? Nietion was burning with anxiety. If he couldn't find the 2 of them, he would have to look for the 6th guy. At this moment, a silhouette attracted Nietion's attention. This silhouette was none other than Han Qianxiu. Han Qianxiu! Nietion's eyes flickered. With a flap of his wings, he soared towards Han Qianxiu like an eagle. Who's there? Han Qianxiu, who was hovering in the air, suddenly felt a chill on his back. He couldn't help but let out a strange cry as he turned around. Chapter 33:28. Life or death, boom. Suddenly, a violent pressure descended from the sky, causing the void to tremble. A figure appeared, his aura sharp and violent like a sword. It was extremely terrifying. It's that kid. At this time, the crowd reacted and looked at Nietion. They recognized him and cried out in panic. Although Nietion had just arrived in the sky, his shocking battle record of killing Black Serpent and drawing with Han Qianxiu had long been remembered by most of the people. More importantly, Nietion was the first person from the sky to be challenged. Many of the people present had a deep impression of him. At this time, Nietion seemed to be coming for Han Qianxiu. This kid still has a battle with the 6th guy. Why is he here instead of cultivating? From the looks of it, he's here for Han Qianjian. Could it be that he didn't enjoy the last battle with Han Qianjian and wants to fight again? The crowd whispered to each other as they fixed their gazes on Nietian. Their eyes were filled with burning desire. Of course, they wanted to see Nietian and Han Chinchio fight again. "Kid, what are you doing?" Han Chinchio looked at Nietian, his eyes trembling. He was clearly very frightened. How could he not feel that Nietian's aura was much stronger than it was 3 days ago? He was very puzzled. 3 days ago, Nietian was clearly seriously injured. How could he recover so quickly? What was even more unbelievable was that Nietian's sword Dao had a breakthrough. If he hadn't seen this with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed it. With Nietian's talent, it was no wonder that the sixth sky valued him. "Where's my friend?" Niet Tianling stood in the void, his eyes filled with cold light. He locked on a Han Chinchio like a vicious wolf, as if he was going to launch his most terrifying attack at any moment. What friend?" Han Chinchio's eyes flashed. Then he shouted, "I've never seen him before." "That's not the answer I want." Nietian's pupils shrank. His face was so gloomy that it was almost dripping blood. Cold spoke. He could no longer suppress his killing intent. Mo Qianjun and Zhou Qiansheng were Black Snake subordinates, and Black Snake was Han Chinchio's subordinate. How could Han Chinchio not know that Mo Qianjun and Zhou Qiansheng had disappeared? Furthermore, ever since Nietian had come to the Sky Sword Martial School, he had only made enemies with Han Chinchio. Han Chinchio had even tried to kill him in front of Nietian. Han Chinchio's reaction was clearly one of panic. The mysterious disappearance of Mo Qianjun and Zhou Qiansheng must be related to him. "I don't know where they are." When Han Chinchio sensed the killing intent in Nietian's eyes, his expression became even more panicked. He let out a strange cry, and his voice became even sharper. "Them?" Niet Tianling laughed and said, "Did I say that I have more than one friend?" Han Chinchio's eyes trembled, and he was suddenly speechless. "Han Chinchio, I'll ask you one more time. Where are my friends?" Nietian's eyes were cold and murderous. He spoke in a deep voice. The killing intent in his body condensed and surged in the void, causing the atmosphere to become very oppressive and suffocating. "This thousand swords doesn't know." Han Chinchio's eyes darkened. He calmed down a little and roared, "Even if you ask 1,000 times, 10,000 times, you still won't know. You're courting death." Nietian roared and stepped forward. His aura was like a mountain, rolling endlessly toward Han Chinchio. Boom! In an instant, Han Chinchio felt a suppressive force fall on him, as if it was going to tear his entire body apart. His eyes trembled, and the fear in his heart was written all over his face. He never expected that Nietian could burst out with such a terrifying aura in an instant. The current Nietian was much stronger than he had been 3 days ago. Bang! In the next moment, a muffled sound came from the void. Han Chinchio's figure was knocked back dozens of meters. After stabilizing himself, he spat out a mouthful of blood. How is this possible? Seeing this scene, the crowd's expression changed. They immediately cried out in shock and disbelief. How could Niet Tian injure Han Chinchio with a mere sword move? Were their eyes playing tricks on them? In the past 3 days, it was clearly Han Chinchio who was suppressing Niet Tian. What did Niet Tian experience in the past 3 days? How did he become so strong? One question after another made everyone look at Niet Tian with trembling expressions, as if they were looking at a monster. A person who achieved a qualitative increase in strength in 3 days. If he wasn't a monster, what was he? Stinking brat. How did you? Han Chinchio looked at Niet Tian with trembling eyes. He was so shocked that he couldn't speak. He couldn't believe that Niet Tian had the strength to suppress him. "I'll suppress you with one sword strike." Niet Tian's eyes were as sharp as swords. He let out a low roar like a wild beast. Immediately after, he crazily released sword intent from his whole body. The terrifying sword intent whistled in the air like a storm. As the stars' heavenly slashed down, an earth-shattering sword hum reverberated in the void. Boom! In the next moment, a sword shadow crashed down like a huge wave, suppressing the void and suppressing Han Chinchio. Han Chinchio suddenly felt the space around him tighten. The boundless sword intent actually sealed the space around him, making it impossible for him to retreat. He could only take the attack head-on. Damn it! Han Chinchio roared and released a shield of sword intent in front of him to resist the enormous pressure. Wong! Crack, crack, crack. When a sword shadow landed on the shield, it actually let out a low, rumbling sound. The sword shadow tore through the shield and then stopped in midair. Obviously, Nie Tian was controlling the sword shadow and didn't let it fall. His control of sword intent had reached such a level that it had reached perfection. The crowd was shocked. Countless pairs of eyes were wide open and their nerves were tense. Nie Tian was simply too frightening. If this sword strike landed, Han Chinchio would definitely be reduced to ashes. Was this still a swordfish? Was this still the swordsman from 3 days ago? 1,000 swords expert was actually powerless under Nie Tian's sword. What was even more unacceptable was that Nie Tian only had the strength of an 8th-stage false saint. Han Chinchio, you still have one chance to speak. If what you're going to say next is not what I want to hear, then don't blame me for being ruthless. At this time, Nie Tian said in a low voice with a sinister chill, "Life or death, it's your choice." These words fell on Han Chinchio's ears like thunder, causing him to panic. His whole body was drenched in cold sweat. A sword hanging above one's head was more frightening than a sword falling down. Nie Tian's methods were vicious. Han Chinchio's eyes trembled as he looked at Nie Tian. Just as he was about to open his mouth, he suddenly stopped. After thinking for a long time, he finally opened his mouth again and said, "Your friend, I'm Yang Wanjian." Yang Wanjian. Nie Tian's eyes darkened in cold, killing intent. What's his name? Yang Sun. Han Chinchio's expression changed. After hesitating for a while, he said the name. The person who captured Mo Qianjun and Zhou Qinsheng was called Yang Sun. He was one of the Sky sword warriors, Wan Jian, Han Chinchio's immediate superior. Chapter 33:29. Nie Tian looked at Han Chinchio and spoke in a cold tone. "Why you're going to look for Lord Wan Jian?" Han Chinchio felt the pressure on his head lessen, and he finally managed to catch his breath. However, his expression became even more flustered, and his voice trembled as his teeth chattered. He had never expected that Nie Tian would actually want to look for Yang Sun directly. One must know that Yang Sun's identity as Wan Jian was already a terrifying existence in the entire Sky Swordsman. In the entire Sky Swordsman, there were only a few dozen Wan Jians. Furthermore, even the Sky Guardians or Sky Sword Slaves wouldn't easily make a move against a Wan Jian. Nie Tian was just a swordfish that had just arrived in the Sky Swordsman. Was he really going to make a move against a Wan Jian just to save his friend? The crowd was also shocked when they heard Nie Tian's words. Is this kid crazy? He's actually going to look for Lord Wan Jian directly. This fellow's combat strength is indeed powerful, and he can become 1,000 swords directly. However, he's too young and impulsive. Yang Wanjian is famous for his ferocity, so it'll be difficult for him to return alive if he goes there directly. Isn't this kid highly valued by Lord Six Sky? Why doesn't he look for Lord Six Sky instead? The crowd discussed, and their expressions were filled with fear when Yang Sun was mentioned. The Sky Swordsman had a strict hierarchy, and Yang Sun was a Wan Jian. He could even kill sword slaves below 100 swords at will. Rumor had it that Yang Sun had killed hundreds of swordfish in a fit of rage, and he wasn't punished at all. It seemed like there was a powerful figure behind Yang Sun, and even the 6 great Sky Swordsmen didn't dare to touch him. In fact, a sword slave in the Sky Swordsman was also a sword slave, but it was just the highest level sword slave in the Sky Swordsman. The sword slaves in the Sky Swordsman were like the greatest supervisors, and the true masters of the Sky Swordsman were the 7 Sky Guardians. In the Sky Sword martial arts, martial strength was the most important. As long as you have enough strength, you can challenge people who are of a higher level than you. Just like Nie Tian, he could directly challenge Han Chinchio. As long as he could kill Han Chinchio, he could replace Han Chinchio's position. Even the sword slaves in the sky could be challenged. However, the sky sword pellets had existed for tens of thousands of years, and no sword slave had ever dared to challenge the sky sword pellets. Take me there. Nietion's gaze was gloomy and cold like a cold pond, and it emitted a bone-piercing chill as he coldly said, "Bring me there." "Kid, are you crazy?" Han Chinchou stared blankly for a moment before shouting, "Is it worth risking your life for your two useless friends? Do you know who Lord Wan Jian is? If I bring you there, we'll both die." Yang Sun was cruel and bloodthirsty. He was famous among the sky sword martial artists. Han Chinchou knew that if he brought Nietion to meet Yang Sun, there would only be one outcome, death. Yang Sun had the backing of a powerful figure, so he wasn't even afraid of the sky sword martial artists. "My friends aren't useless." The look in Nietion's eyes darkened as he let out a roar. Immediately, the sword shadow that was floating in midair suddenly sank down and directly pressed down. Boom! A muffled sound rang out in the air as Han Chinchou's figure was sent flying. A bloody light appeared in the air, and the stench of blood filled the air. "Arg! My arm!" Han Chinchou stabilized himself. Half of his body was covered in blood, and one of his arms had been shattered. Nietion didn't kill him. Instead, he broke one of his arms. "I'll say it one more time. Bring me there." Nietion's gaze was gloomy as he spoke in a cold tone. Sensing the killing intent in Nietion's eyes, Han Chinchou hesitated for a few seconds before nodding his head. "I'll bring you there. Let's go." With a bellow, Nietion arrived by Han Chinchou's side in a single step like a wild beast. Then he reached out his hand and lifted Han Chinchou off the ground. Han Chinchou felt the power around Nietion's body and trembled in fear. He couldn't imagine how a rank 8 pseudo-sacred martial artist could have such a powerful martial body. That kid really went to look for Lord Wan Jian. Everyone looked at the disappearing figures of Nietion and Han Chinchou, and their eyes couldn't help but tremble. They couldn't wait to follow and take a look. Under Han Chinchou's lead, Nietion soon arrived at a huge valley. At the entrance of the valley, two giant swords hung down from the sky. The aura was incomparably sharp, and it gave people a strong sense of oppression. These two giant swords were like huge doors, imposing and majestic. Lord Wan Jian is inside. Han Chinchou looked at the valley in front of him and said in a trembling voice. At the same time, in the valley, to be exact, this was no longer a valley, but an open-air plaza. On the plaza, there was a huge platform surrounded by huge pavilions. At this moment, there were dozens of female swordsmen dancing on the platform. They were graceful and graceful like fairies. These female swordsmen were all dressed in chiffon clothes, and their faces were exquisite and beautiful. As they danced, their graceful figures could be seen through the chiffon. What was even more shocking was that these female swordsmen were extremely strong. Even the weakest of them was a pseudo-sacred martial artist with a transcendent sword soul. QL11 with such strength, they would definitely be monstrous powerhouses in the realms. However, at this moment, they could only sing and dance for the entertainment of others. In each of the pavilions outside the high platform, there was a middle-aged man dressed in luxurious clothes. Beside them, there were several scantily clad women serving them. These women were actually swordsmen as well, and their strength was no weaker than the female swordsmen on the high platform. "Ha ha! Brother Yang, the swordsmen this time are really not bad. They're much better than the previous batch." At this time, a man was drinking and laughing at the same time. He looked at the high platform with an undisguised, lustful gaze. These swordsmen are not bad, but these maidservants are a lot worse. The person who was addressed as Brother Yang was a middle-aged man with a fat head and big ears. He sneered and suddenly looked at one of the maidservants beside him coldly. The corner of his mouth twitched, and he reached out and grabbed the maidservant by her neck. "Brother Yang, are you going to kill someone again?" The eyes of the others trembled when they saw this, and they actually became excited. This fat man was the famous sky swordsman, Wan Jian Yang's son. As for the other men, their identities were the same as Yang's son, Wan Jian. With a status like Wan Jian, there was no need for him to mine sword intent. These Wanjian swordsmen could not come out to the sky swordsmen, so they found some female swordsmen to have some fun. These female swordsmen were all forcibly brought to the sky swordsmen. Compared to the sword slaves who mined the sword intent, their experiences were even more tragic. Not only did they have to serve Yang Sun and the others, but they would also be killed if they were not careful. For example, Yang Sun was so angry that he wanted to kill the maidservant in his hand. The other Wanjian swordsmen were already used to this scene, so they were not nervous at all. Instead, they were looking forward to the scene of Yang Sun strangling the maidservant to death. Chapter 33:30. Who is Yang Sun? Little girl, your face has always been dark. Is it because you're serving this 10,000 swords that you're unhappy? Coming to the sky sword marshals, do you still think you are Missy? Yang Sun sneered as he exerted force in his hand. The maid's face turned red as she struggled with all her might. However, it was useless. The difference in strength between her and Yang Sun was too great. Before coming to the sky sword marshals, these female swordsmen were all genius swordsmen with distinguished identities. However, in the sky sword marshals, they were treated like slaves. Of course, they felt uncomfortable. Yang Sun was unhappy because this maid didn't smile when she was serving Yang Sun. I don't dare anymore. The maid struggled and used all her strength to speak. Go to hell. However, Yang Sun did not seem to hear her words. With a roar, he exerted force in his hand. Bang! In the next instant, a muffled sound was heard. Blood splattered in the air. Yang Sun had actually crushed the maid's neck. A genius swordswoman died, just like that. The other maids were stunned by the scene in front of them. Their pretty faces were blank and could not react for a long time. Bad luck. Yang Sun could not help but frown when his hand was stained with blood. He shook his hand as if nothing had happened. It was as if the person he killed was not a human, but an ant. In his eyes, these female swordsmen were no different from ants. They were to be trampled and slaughtered by him. Ha ha! Brother Yang did not disappoint us indeed. Come, let's toast to Brother Yang. At this time, the other 10,000 swords members laughed heartily, stood up one after another, and toasted Yang Sun. Although they were all Wanjians, they were all respectful to Yang Sun. It was obvious that they were afraid of him. What they were afraid of was not Yang Sun's strength, but the person behind him. They all knew that behind Yang Sun, there was a guardian of the sky sword marshals. Furthermore, Yang Sun was different from the other Wanjians. He came from the sacred world. He seemed to have made some mistake and was exiled to the sky sword marshal school. Come, drink. Yang Sun laughed. He did not stand up. He just raised his cup and drank it in one gulp. Bang! However, at that moment, a muffled explosion sounded out as a black silhouette flew out and smashed into the stage, causing the female swordsman to cry out in fear and retreat. Someone's barging in. The other Wanjians exclaimed in shock. This was a place where they had fun, and it was considered a forbidden area for sword practitioners in the sky. Who would be so bold as to barge in? Han Qinxiu. Yang Sun's face sank. When he saw that the figure on the high platform was Han Qinxiu, he immediately stood up and roared, "What the hell are you doing? Lord Yang, Han Qinxiu struggled to his feet. His entire body was covered in blood, and his eyes were trembling as he spoke. Who is Yang Sun? However, before he could finish his words, a furious voice could be heard. Following it, a figure stepped out from the sky and stood in the air like a giant sword. The figure was none other than Nie Tian. There were some forbidding formations set up in the valley, which was why it took Nie Tian some time to get in. The crowd of Wanjians and female swordsmen's eyes widened when they saw Nie Tian's sudden appearance. Who was this person to be so bold as to barge in? How dare you? Yang Sun glared at Nie Tian with eyes spitting flames of anger. He let out a roar and crushed the cup in his hand. He had been in the Sky Sword Martial School for a long time, but no one had ever dared to act so impudently in front of him. What was even more intolerable was that Nie Tian was only an 8th order pseudo-sacred cultivator. Yang Sun. Hovering in midair, Nie Tian's eyes turned and locked onto Yang Sun like a sharp blade. Every word he uttered was filled with cold, killing intent. The maidservant beside Yang Sun was completely dumbfounded. Her eyes trembled as she stared at Nietian. The astonishment in her heart was perfectly displayed on her face. "You dare to provoke me? Are you tired of living?" Yang Sun let out a furious roar. His aura exploded forth, causing the gazebo to collapse. Then, he took a step forward, and an incomparably vigorous sword aura rolled out, rolling in the air like dark clouds that filled the sky, and madly pressed down on Nietian. At this moment, Yang Sun's terrifying strength was mercilessly exposed. From the terrifying sword aura alone, it was obvious that Yang Sun's strength had far surpassed Han Qianqiu's. His sword art had definitely reached the sacred realm, and he had reached the realm of sword rhythm. As violent as Yang Sun was, his attacks were incomparably vicious. He intended to crush Nietian with his sword. He did not care why Nietian was here. Anyone who dared to act arrogantly in front of him must die. Boom! In the blink of an eye, Nietian felt the space around him tighten. A terrifying, oppressive force descended, trying to crush him to death. The other Wanjian powerhouses watched from the side and sneered as they discussed. Who is this kid? How dare he barge into Brother Yang's territory? He's courting death. This hothead is fierce and aggressive. It seems like he's here to settle scores with Brother Yang. Settle scores? Ha ha ha. I think he's here to seek death. The group of Wanjians laughed wantonly. Obviously, they did not take Nietian seriously. A cultivator who was not even a rank 9 pseudo-sage came to find trouble with Yang Sun. If this wasn't seeking death, then what was? Such an ant should be crushed to death. There was nothing more to say. You think you could suppress me? However, at this moment, Nietian let out a loud roar. Sword intent surged out from his body like a raging wave and crashed into the void, causing the mountains to collapse and the earth to crack. Everyone's eyes flickered as they exclaimed in shock. They did not expect Nietian to be able to exert such terrifying power under Yang Sun's suppression. Bang! The next moment, a muffled sound came from the void. Yang Sun's aura was directly shattered and turned into a raging wave that surged in the void. Yang Sun's body swayed, and he was forced to take a few steps back. His face was ugly to the extreme, and he could not believe it. An rank 8 pseudo-sage cultivator had forcefully shattered his sword aura. How is this possible? Yang Sun's eyes trembled. The way he looked at Nietian changed slightly. It was no longer as disdainful as before. At this moment, he knew that the person standing in front of him was a monstrous talent. The others were even more shocked. Their mouths were wide open as they stared at Nietian in shock. Yang Sun. Nietian's sword aura surged, and his eyes were like those of a wild beast. They were extremely terrifying as he stared at Yang Sun and roared. One had to admit that Yang Sun's strength was indeed terrifying. Fortunately, Nietian had just achieved a breakthrough in his sword Dao. Furthermore, his martial body was even stronger with the help of the heavenly runes. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult for him to break through Yang Sun's sword aura. "Kid, who are you?" Yang Sun looked at Nietian and asked in a low voice. He actually felt a trace of threat from Nietian. Chapter 33-31. Sword of Desolation. Yang Sun stared at Nietian, his eyes trembling. He felt threatened by Nietian. He could not believe that an 8th-order pseudo-saint swordsman with the transcendent sword body could make him, a swordsman of the saint realm, feel threatened. He sensed that Nietian had a terrifying power hidden in his body, and this power made him fearful. Moreover, the power that Nietian had displayed just now was too strange. It was far beyond the power of warriors of the same level. "Where are my friends?" Nietian's eyes were murderous, and his cold voice trembled in the void, full of murderous intent. "Friends." Yang Sun was stunned, feeling a little strange. "Mo Qianjun and Zhu Qiansheng," Nietianling said coldly, the murderous intent in his eyes growing stronger. "Who are they?" Yang Sun was stunned again, still feeling very strange. "Lord Yang, they are the corpse-eating, ghostly slave you asked me to catch," and his friend, Han Qianqiu said with an ugly expression. So it's those two ants. Yang Sun came to his senses, and his eyes darkened slightly. He sneered and said, "You are the friend of those two ants. It seems that the rumored person challenged by the sixth sky is you. I'll ask you again, where are my friends?" Nietion's eyes were cold, and his body was surrounded by sword will. The sword momentum around him became more and more terrifying. It was extremely fierce, as if it was going to tear the sky apart. When everyone saw this and felt the sword will aura on Nietion, they could not help but frown, and their expressions became strange. This kid is so strange. He is clearly only at the transcendent sword body realm. But why is his sword will stronger than that of a transcendent esoteric swordsman? I heard that this kid has just arrived at the Sky Sword Martial School, and it seems that Lord Six Sky is very interested in him. Could he be a guy with a background? So what if he has a background? How dare he show off in front of Brother Yang? He is courting death. As they discussed, the way they looked at Nietion couldn't help but turn cold. Yang Sun had the support of a guardian. Not to mention the fact that Nietion was someone valued by the Sixth Sky. Even if the Sixth Sky came personally, Yang Sun would not be afraid. Humph! All of a sudden, Yang Sun let out a cold laugh. His eyes stared at Nietion with a cunning expression and said, "Little brat, you're a genius. As long as you follow me in the future and obediently become my dog, I, Wan Jian, guarantee that you will be able to walk unhindered in the Sky Sword Martial world. Also, you can pick any of these beauties before you. If you like one, you can take her with you. But you must promise me that you will be loyal to me, Wan Jian, and be an obedient dog. Whoever I, Wan Jian, ask you to bite, you must bite." Yang Sun's arrogant voice was very domineering. He looked at Nietion, his eyes rolling around. His expression seemed to be saying, "Brat, I'm going to eat you up." The others were startled when they heard Yang Sun's words. Based on Yang Sun's ruthlessness, not only did Nietion not kill him after barging into this place, but he was trying to recruit him instead. However, that wasn't surprising. After all, Nietion's talent was simply too frightening and shocking. "Little brat, think about it carefully. This is a chance for you to live." Yang Sun raised his eyebrows when he saw Nietion's gloomy expression. "I'll be your father." Nietion's face grew grim, and his eyes turned bloodshot. He could no longer suppress his rage, and it burst forth with a loud rumble. Like a terrifying, raging wave, it crashed into the void, looking extremely terrifying. Yang Sun was too full of himself, asking Nietion to be his dog. What a joke. As a human, one should live with dignity, a righteous aura that could soar to the 9 heavens. You don't know what's good for you. Yang Sun's eyes flickered as his anger soared to the sky. A violent aura spread out from his body, making him look like a ferocious beast. Asking Nietion to be his dog was already a great compromise. However, Nietion still scolded him. How could he not be angry? Bang! In the next moment, Yang Sun took a step forward, causing the void to tremble violently. Immediately afterwards, a stream of dark sword intent surged out, forming a terrifying rift in the air. Carrying an intense aura of desolation, it spread towards Nietion. Desolation, sword essence. When the other 10,000 swords saw this, their eyes trembled and they exclaimed. Yang Sun cultivated the desolate sword intent, which was extremely terrifying. The desolate force contained within the sword intent had a strong corrosive effect on a cultivator's martial physique and divine soul. Once, when Yang Sun had a conflict with another Wan Jian's expert, he used the desolate sword intent to slowly corrode his opponent's martial physique. Now that Yang Sun thought about it, he could still clearly remember the tragic scene before his death. At this moment, Yang Sun released the desolate sword intent to kill Nietion. If it was any other Wan Jian's, they would not dare to be so cruel. After all, Nietion still had a duel with the Sixth Sky. However, Yang Sun didn't care about that. Nietion dared to be so arrogant in front of him. He had to kill him. "Wan Jian, is it?" Nietion laughed and roared. "Today, I want to see how strong you so-called Wan Jians are. What gives you the right to be so arrogant?" Boom! As soon as he finished speaking, he stabbed out with his sword. A terrifying wave of sword intent appeared and headed toward the crack. A loud explosion took place in the sky as the two forces crumbled at the same time. Nietion's figure took a step back as blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Yang Sun's body swayed as he looked at Nietion in shock once again. The desolate sword intent he released actually failed to kill Nietion. Instead, it only slightly injured Nietion. This was unbelievable. Was the swordsman in front of him really only at the 8th stage pseudo-sage realm with the divine sword body realm? One had to know that Yang Sun was not only a sage realm swordsman at the sword aura realm, but he was also a sage. However, the strength of a sage realm martialist would be suppressed in the sword martial art realm in the sky. The sword martial art in the sky was filled with terrifying sword intent, which naturally formed a huge sword principle restriction. It had a strong suppression on all sage realm martialists. Even so, Yang Sun's strength was far from what a 9th stage pseudo-sage realm martialist could compare to. Moreover, the sword martial art in the sky did not suppress the swordsman's sword principle strength at all. Yang Sun was a swordsman at the 2nd heaven of sword aura realm, but he couldn't kill a swordsman with the divine sword body realm. Was this a joke? Is this all you've got? Nietion stabilized his body. His eyes released a cold light as he looked at Yang Sun coldly. He growled, his eyes surging with strong disdain. Brat, you're courting death. Yang Sun was completely enraged. The sword intent in his body tumbled violently to the extreme. There was an explosion in the air, and black cracks appeared all over his body, releasing a strong, desolate chi. Sword of Desolation. Immediately after, Yang Sun roared, and the desolate cracks condensed into a sword in his hand. It was his sword of original spirit, the Sword of Desolation. Sword of Desolation. The other Wan Jian's eyes trembled as they stared at the Sword of Desolation in Yang Sun's hand in horror. Yang Sun had revealed the Sword of Desolation. This meant that he was going to start a massacre. Immediately after, 6 or 7 Wan Jians reacted and rushed into the sky. Boom! At this moment, the Sword of Desolation in Yang Sun's hand slashed across the void. Suddenly, desolate cracks appeared and spread in the void. In the blink of an eye, they covered the entire square in the valley. Ward! Nietion's eyes flickered slightly as he sensed a terrifying ward power approaching him. Chapter 33-32. Sword Rhythm. Rumble, rumble, rumble. In the void above the valley, terrifying and desolate cracks, like giant snakes, surged violently. The entire valley was filled with a suffocating aura of desolation. The air was filled with a desolate aura that made people feel like death was approaching. What a terrifying barrier. Nietion's eyes trembled and his expression turned ugly. The barrier's power was extremely terrifying and the desolate aura was suffocating. Brat, you're dead. Yang Sun looked at Nietion with a sinister expression and the fat on his face trembled. Nietion frowned. He felt the desolate cracks in the air were like maggots that were desperately drilling into his body as if they wanted to devour him. Boom! His body shook and a terrifying power surged out from his body. Dragon chi surged and forcefully forced the desolate cracks out of his body. But at this moment, miserable screams sounded. The desolate cracks invaded the bodies of the maids, and sword mistresses and black runes appeared on their bodies. Then they instantly split open and blood gushed out. Such a scene was extremely tragic and bloody. The desolate barrier was filled with desolate cracks, and it was extremely terrifying. Nietion could resist these desolate cracks, but the others couldn't. When Yang Sun activated the barrier, he not only enveloped Nietion, but also the maids and sword mistresses. Bastard! Nietion looked at Yang Sun and roared. Oomph, oomph, oomph. Yang Sun laughed coldly and didn't care in the slightest. He ruthlessly said, "These female sword maids are like pigs and dogs in this myriad sword's eyes. It is their honor to die in this myriad sword's barrier." Ha ha ha. At the end of his speech, Yang Sun actually began to laugh maniacally. His fat face was nauseating. In his eyes, the maids and sword mistresses were indeed no different from pigs and dogs. He could kill them if he wanted to without any hesitation. That's enough. Nietion's eyes trembled for a moment. His eyes were filled with a frightening coldness. With a roar, killing intent erupted from his body. Someone like Yang Sun, who was violent and bloodthirsty and had no regard for human life, aroused his intense desire to kill. Ant-like thing, go to hell. At this time, Yang Sun was also furious. His roar was like thunder, and the sword of desolation in his hand pierced through the air. A terrible sword shadow appeared, and the sword body was entwined with terrifying desolation cracks, sweeping towards Nietion. Saint Heaven-defying sword. Earth and man is one, stars and moons sink. However, Nietion was not afraid at all. With a low roar, he slashed out with his sword. The sword's shadow whistled out, and the sword light was released. It was dazzling, and the killing intent was sharp. Boom! Immediately after, the two swords clashed against each other, causing the entire space to tremble. A terrifying shockwave rippled out like a tsunami. Suddenly, the cracks in the void became even more violent. The maids and sword mistresses screamed. The air was covered in blood, and the space was covered in a layer of dark red. Damn it! Nietion stabilized his body, his countenance incomparably dark. If this continued, these maids would be corroded by the desolation cracks. Nietion, the world eyes right above his head. At this moment, the ghost emperor's voice rang out, reminding Nietion. MHM. Nietion's eyes flashed as he replied, after which a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back as he directly unleashed his astral energy. A heaven-shrouding totem appeared, rumbling in the air as a majestic might gushed forth, akin to gigantic tidal waves. In the blink of an eye, the heaven-shrouding totem enveloped all the maids, gathering them together. Smelly brat, you can't even protect yourself, and you still want to save others? Yang Sun roared in a low voice, his countenance grim. After which, the sword of desolation frenziedly slashed towards Nietion. Nietion's eyes narrowed, but he didn't care in the slightest. With a flap of his wings, he resembled a gigantic dragon soaring up into the skies. Swish! In the next instant, his devil eye opened as the extreme devil annihilation imprint transformed into a black-colored blade that pierced towards Yang Sun. Boom! After which, the extreme devil annihilation imprint slammed down, directly tearing a gigantic crack in the world barrier. This is the moment. Nietion's eyes trembled as he slashed out with his sword. The sword shadows were akin to dragons, majestic, expanding the crack by tens of times. Next, with an intention of his will, the heaven-shrouding totem transformed into a gigantic hand that directly flung everyone out of the world barrier. Bang! But at that moment, the sword of desolation descended and directly bombarded Nietion's body. His silhouette was like a broken kite that instantly flew backwards, leaving a trail of blood in the air. At the same time, the world barrier began to close up and was restored in an instant. Nietion steadied his body. His entire body was dripping with blood, but his eyes were extremely sharp. He used the extreme devil annihilation imprint to break the world barrier and save the others, but he didn't leave the world. Young man, you really have a chivalrous heart. Yang Sun looked at Nietion and sneered. But what's the use of that? Do you think those pigs and dogs can live after leaving the world barrier? After I, Wan Jian, kill you, I will kill them all. Is that so? Nietion Lung laughed. His body shook and the blood on his body disappeared. His aura once again became fierce. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he stared at Yang Sun. Unfortunately, you won't be able to walk out of this world today. Huh? Yang Sun was stunned for a moment. His face couldn't help but sink, and his heart was filled with shock. Nietion took a blow from him head-on, but he was completely fine. How was this possible? How could Nietion's martial physique be so strong to this extent? Moreover, he discovered that Nietion wasn't afraid of his desolation imprint at all. It was very strange. Just now, Nie Tian indeed took a blow from Yang Sun head-on, but his martial physique was strong, and with the protection of the heaven-shrouding totem and the wings of astral soul, he didn't suffer any serious injuries. The most terrifying thing was, after the heaven-shrouding runes were unsealed, Nie Tian's recovery speed was even more shocking. It was several times stronger than before. Stinking brat, your strength has indeed exceeded Wang Jian's expectations. But now you still have to die. Then, Yang Sun calmed down. His cold eyes trembled as he spoke in a low voice. His expression was extremely cold. The terror of a sword rhythm swordsman is not something you ants can imagine. Then, Yang Sun roared. The desolation imprint in his hand flowed with a mysterious power. The aura was extremely terrifying, and the heaven and earth trembled. The power of the sword rhythm. The other Wang Jian in the sky looked at Yang Sun and shouted in horror. Yang Sun actually used the power of the sword rhythm to kill a swordsman with the divine sword physique. The most terrifying thing about a sword rhythm swordsman was the power of the sword rhythm. It was a kind of power that could increase the power of the sword intent by several times. However, every time the sword rhythm was used, it would cause a certain impact on the swordsman's martial physique. Therefore, under normal circumstances, sword rhythm swordsmen rarely use the sword rhythm. But at this moment, in order to kill Nie Tian, Yang Sun actually planned to use the sword rhythm. Come on! At this moment, Nie Tian let out a low roar. The celestial evolution sacred power in his body surged crazily. His body actually emitted a sword cry, as if Wang Jian was roaring. Outside his body, the sword intent surged crazily and shot up to the sky. A terrifying sword light was released, making his entire body look like an unsheathed sharp sword. Chapter 33:33. A violent battle boom. Nie Tian took a step forward as his sword chi soared to the skies. The sword chi around him was vigorous and sharp, like a tsunami. His aura shook the heavens and earth. He was already at the transcendent God sword body. Under the stimulation of the celestial evolution saint force, his sword Tao had reached the transcendent God esoteric realm. This kid is so strong. The eyes of the crowd trembled. They could feel the undulations of Nie Tian's sword chi through the barrier, causing them to be shocked. Kid, I have underestimated you. Yang Sun roared. The killing intent in his eyes intensified. The sword of desolation in his hand slashed out, and a crack appeared in the air. It was like a ghost's hand trying to envelop Nie Tian. The terrifying crack was incomparably terrifying. It was enveloped by a layer of dark light. It was the sword chi. The appearance of the sword chi caused the strength of Yang Sun's sword chi to increase by several folds. It was incomparably sharp, and the chi of desolation enveloped the entire barrier. 9 limits of starry sky, sun annihilation. Nie Tian frowned. He slashed out with a starry sky slash. His sword chi condensed in the air, and a terrifying sword shadow appeared, slashing towards the crack. Boom! In the air, a terrifying sound rang out. Under the impact of the crack, the sword shadow in the air shattered. The space trembled violently, as though it was about to collapse. Nie Tian felt a violent, strangling force rushing towards him. He narrowed his eyes and retreated. Mfumph. At this moment, Yang Sun laughed coldly and shouted, Die! The sword of desolation slashed through the air, and a dazzling ray of desolation appeared. It was extremely terrifying, as though it wanted to tear everything apart. It was aimed at Nie Tian. Nie Tian frowned. He forcefully struck out with his sword, and a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back. He retreated once again. Pooh! Unfortunately, he was still a step too late. The terrifying desolation light fell and left a terrible wound on his chest. Blood gushed out and instantly dyed his body red. He steadied his body and immediately felt a tearing pain all over his body. A terrifying force rushed into his martial body as if it wanted to tear him apart. It's the power of sword rhythm. The Ghost Emperor immediately sensed that something was wrong and roared, feeling extremely nervous. Nie Tian was injured by the power of desolation, and the power of the sword charm invaded his martial body. The power of the sword rhyme was extremely violent. Nie Tian was only a transcendent swordsman, so he could not withstand it at all. It was like a swordsman with a lower realm being stabbed by a swordsman with a higher realm. Once the sword chi entered the body, it was highly likely that the swordsman would explode and die. With Nie Tian's current realm, it was not easy for him to force out the sword rhythm. He would need to exhaust a large amount of sword intent. Let me force out the sword rhythm. At that moment, Liolio's voice suddenly sounded. Then, Nie Tian's forehead flickered and a white light was released. Then, waves of the power of heaven's punishment surged out of his body. The double impact of the power of heaven's punishment and the power of the sword rhythm spread out. Even Nie Tian let out a muffled groan, and his expression turned very ugly. Boom! However, in the next moment, he directly forced out the power of the sword rhythm, and his expression turned better. How is this possible? Yang Sun was stunned by the scene in front of him, and his expression turned very ugly. He could not believe that Nie Tian had actually forced out the power of the sword rhythm. The silver-haired swordsman in front of him was even more terrifying than he had imagined. The power of the sword rhythm in the sage realm is indeed terrifying. After Nie Tian recovered, his eyes trembled slightly, and he said coldly, "However, this kind of power is not enough to kill me. Yang Sun, what else do you have? Just use it. You still dare to be arrogant in the face of death. Brat, today, the boundary of the Wan Jian will be your grave." Yang Sun shouted angrily. Suddenly, the Sword of Desolation was released crazily and condensed on the Sword of Desolation, causing the aura of the Sword of Desolation to become more and more terrifying. Boom! Yang Sun shook the Sword of Desolation. Suddenly, a vast and boundless aura of desolation was released and filled the entire boundary, causing the power of desolation in the boundary to become even more intense and suffocating. Is that all? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and the corner of his mouth twitched into a disdainful sneer. How could he not see that Yang Sun was secretly accumulating the power of the sword, preparing for the next attack to erupt with a terrifying attack? However, he was not afraid because he was also accumulating the power of the sword. Arrogant brat, die! Yang Sun roared angrily and slashed out with the Sword of Desolation. Suddenly, the roaring Sword of Desolation burst out, causing the void to tremble. The entire world seemed to be submerged by the power of desolation. Boom, boom, boom. In the void, waves of terrifying power collided, and the roaring sound of the explosion could be heard continuously. It was as if the entire world was going to wither and die. Feeling the suffocating aura in the void, Nie Tian frowned slightly, but his eyes were extremely firm. He said coldly, "How can such power kill me? Sacred heaven-defying sword. Earth and man is one, stars and moon sink." In the next instant, he roared as the energy in his body erupted forth like a wild beast, frenziedly fluctuating in the air. After that, a gigantic sword shadow broke through the air, akin to a primordial beast rushing out from the raging waves. The terrifying aura it exuded was enough to devour and suppress everything. In the sky, everyone looked at the boundary with a dull expression. They were so shocked that they could not speak. Originally, they thought that Yang Sun would be able to kill Nie Tian as easily as crushing an ant. They did not expect that the battle would end up like this. Yang Sun only had a slight advantage, but Nie Tian's martial body was so strong that it made people's hair stand on end. It was as if he could not be killed. With this extremely strong martial body, Nie Tian was testing the limits of Yang Sun's strength little by little. Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, the Desolation Sword was rumbling in the air. It was like a terrifying ocean that was rushing towards Lin Fan. That terrifying sword shadow rushed into it. Chi, chi, chi. Then, the two forces collided with each other, and a terrible sound of collision could be heard. In the void, small cracks appeared, as if the void was going to collapse at any time. Little ant, with your strength. How can you go against me? Yang Sun roared. The sword of desolation rolled unceasingly, and a monstrous aura rushed out, forming a terrible pressure in the air, suppressing everything. Not only will I go against you, I will also step on you. In the endless chaos of space, and yet Tion's voice sounded. It was incomparably domineering. At this moment, Yang Sun suddenly felt a terrifying force appear, causing his eyes to tremble and his expression to become dull. What is that? The people in the sky also felt that something was wrong. Their eyes trembled violently, and they shouted. In the next moment, a shocking scene happened. Boom! Within the barrier, an extremely powerful will gushed forth, extending into the surrounding space. After that, a gigantic silhouette appeared. This silhouette was over 10,000 meters tall, towering between the heavens and the earth, resembling an ancient devil, exuding a towering aura. It's a silhouette. Everyone looked at the huge silhouette. Their eyes trembled. They were all extremely shocked. Chapter 33-34. I'm going to step on you. Boom! Tion activated his celestial evolution sacred body. Waves of celestial evolution sacred power surrounded his body. It was extremely terrifying. The eyes of the sky evolution's sacred body were like the sun and moon, releasing a terrifying light. It was as if flames were burning, and a powerful and domineering aura spread throughout the entire enchantment. Boom! In the next moment, the aura of the sky evolution holy body was released. It forcefully broke through the barren sword will. The sky evolution sacred body was formed from the sky evolution sacred soul. The sky evolution sacred soul was one of the 9 ancient sacred souls. It was definitely one of the strongest souls in the world. Once this kind of soul power was released, it was enough to shake heaven and earth. Bang! Immediately after, Yang Sun felt a terrifying force appear, and his figure shook as he was pushed back hundreds of meters. Kid, what kind of power is this? Yang Sun steadied himself, and his eyes trembled violently. He could feel that the power flowing through the sky evolution saint body was no weaker than his sword aura. In fact, the majestic aura of the sky evolution saint soul was actually able to suppress his desolation sword will and the sword aura. However, Tion was clearly an 8th-order pseudo-saint. How could he release such terrifying power? Enough strength for me to step on you. Tion laughed. His eyes were as dark as the abyss, and the power of the gods and demons surged around him, making him look like a demon god who had walked out of hell. Impudent! Yang Sun was enraged. He let out a roar as his aura gushed forth, after which waves of desolate energy condensed in his hands. At this moment, an extremely dark and terrifying power appeared outside his body. Bloodline power! Tion's eyes narrowed. He immediately understood that Yang Sun had started to use his bloodline power. Everyone's eyes were trembling. They couldn't believe their eyes. Not only had Tion forced Yang Sun to use his sword rhyme power, but the latter had also used his bloodline power. An 8th-stage pseudo-saint martial artist was actually this powerful. It was truly inconceivable. Boom, boom, boom. A terrifying bloodline power was released from Yang Sun's body, circulating in the void, causing the void to continuously emit violent sounds. Looking at Yang Sun, Tion couldn't help but frown as he thought to himself. His sword intent has become much stronger after being stimulated by his bloodline power. Stinking brat, you can die without regrets for forcing me, Wan Jian, to use the power of my bloodline. Yang Sun roared. The power of his bloodline condensed on his palm, forming a dark vortex that contained the power of desolation that could devour everything. Yang Sun's bloodline power was the desolate bloodline, which was interlinked with the desolate sword intent that he cultivated. It greatly enhanced the desolate sword intent. Moreover, the desolate bloodline was very tyrannical. Once it was released, it would cause a strong weakening of a martial artist, just like Dugani's 100 virtual body. However, the desolate bloodline was much more domineering and powerful than the 100 virtual body. Since Yang Sun had even used the power of his bloodline, it meant that he was determined to kill Nietian. It's not certain who will live and who will die. It's just the power of my bloodline. Do you think I don't have it? Nie Tianling laughed. Then, the divine demon power surged out of his body, making him look even more violent. Oomph. You're just an ant from territory. Your bloodline power is nothing. Yang Sun laughed coldly. Then, he raised the sword of desolation in his hand. A shocking aura of desolation spread out, and the space was suddenly filled with a murderous and destructive power. Die! Then, the sword of desolation fell, and a terrifying, desolate sword shadow appeared. It tore through the void and pressed down on the sky, evolution holy body. Nietian's eyes darkened slightly. The divine demon power in his body suddenly surged out and merged with the sky, evolution holy body. Boom! The sky, evolution holy body merged with the divine demon power, and his aura suddenly soared. He was like a demon god, releasing a supreme demonic aura. In the next moment, the sky evolution holy body punched the desolate sword shadow in the air. Boom, boom, boom. Then, the desolate sword shadow and the sky evolution holy body collided. The power of desolation and the sky evolution holy power exploded at the same time. The terrifying power of the bloodline clashed with each other and turned into a destructive force in the void. It spread in all directions as if it wanted to drown everything. Boom, boom, boom. A series of muffled explosions rang out. All kinds of terrifying powers collided with each other. They swallowed each other and collided with each other, forming wild waves in the air and dazzling light. The void trembled as if it was going to collapse at any moment. Yang Sun, I will step on you today. At that moment, in the chaotic space, Niet Tian's angry roar rang out. Then, he rushed over like a light blade towards Yang Sun. Yang Sun was stunned. He could not help but tremble. He did not expect Niet Tian to be so ferocious. Under the wild waves, Niet Tian was not afraid at all. Instead, he rushed over. The strength of his martial body was unimaginable. Lunatic! Seeing Niet Tian's figure approaching, Yang Sun felt a terrifying pressure. He immediately roared and started to retreat. Although Niet Tian was only an 8th-rank pseudo-sage, he could feel that Niet Tian's martial body was far stronger than his. If they fought head-on, he would definitely be the one at a disadvantage. Are you afraid? Niet Tian stood in the air, allowing the terrifying power to attack his martial body. His aura became even more ferocious, and a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back. His speed suddenly increased as he flew towards Yang Sun. Boom! In the next moment, he arrived above Yang Sun's head and directly stepped down. He was really going to step on Yang Sun. How dare you? Yang Sun's eyes trembled. He felt a violent force pressing down on him. His face instantly turned ugly. At that moment, Niet Tian's foot had already landed on his head. You! Yang Sun spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes trembled uncontrollably. He couldn't believe that he was really being stepped on by Niet Tian. With a cold laugh, Niet Tian said, "Aren't people like you, who think you're high and mighty, just as lowly when you're being humiliated?" Then he stomped his foot down again, looking extremely arrogant and violent. Bang! A muffled sound rang out in the air. Yang Sun's figure was directly sent flying and fell straight to the ground. The crowd in the air was completely dumbfounded. Their expressions stiffened and they were speechless. The maidservants and sword mistresses naturally didn't expect that the young swordsman who risked his life to save them would actually be so powerful. It turned out that the high and mighty Yang Sun was only SOSO. As for the experts of the Wanjian Alliance, they were even more dumbfounded. All of them had expressions of disbelief on their faces. Yang Sun, the most ferocious swordsman in the sky, was actually being stepped on by a swordfish. This was simply a joke. However, this huge joke had really happened in front of them. Chapter 33-35. I must kill Boom. In the air, Niet Tian descended and stepped on Yang Sun's head, causing the air to tremble. Spurt. After a muffled sound, Yang Sun's body trembled and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He was like a cannonball, smashing into the ground. Boom! On the ground, there was a huge rumble. Yang Sun had smashed a huge pit, and half of his body had sunk deep into the ground. At this moment, Nie Tian's figure descended like a huge boulder. His foot directly stepped on Yang Sun's neck in an arrogant and domineering manner. You! Yang Sun's eyes trembled. He was so shocked that he could not speak. His entire body was already dripping with blood, and his face was crooked to the point that it was almost impossible to tell that he was human. Originally, he and Nie Tian had been fighting against each other. However, in the blink of an eye, Nie Tian had charged over, and the situation had taken a turn for the worse. Before he could even react, he had been trampled under Nie Tian's foot. His body was in extreme pain, and blood flowed everywhere. He was in an extremely sorry state. However, compared to that, what he could not accept even more was that he was stepped on by Nie Tian. He was a cultivator from the holy world. He was the mighty Wan Jian. He was a swordsman of the charm of swords. He was a supreme existence that ruled over everything. However, at this moment, his head was stepped on by Nie Tian. He could not even speak. This humiliation, this trampling on his dignity, was something he could not accept. At this moment, he stared at Nie Tian with bloodshot eyes. He was tempted to skin Nie Tian alive, cut him into pieces, and grind his bones into dust. Originally, Nie Tian was an ant-like existence in his eyes. However, he was being stepped on by an ant-like existence. This humiliation almost drove him mad. This guy is so ruthless. Up in the sky, the experts of the 10,000 Swords sect sucked in a breath of cold air as they looked at the enraged Nie Tian. When their eyes met Nie Tian's, they felt a chill run down their spines, and their eyes flickered with fear. Nie Tian had long seen that Inspector Yang was violent and opinionated. Therefore, he directly stepped on Yang Sun's head and completely crushed his mentality. This psychological blow was crueler than any torture. Yang Sun, I'm stepping on your head. Where is your arrogance? Where is your pride? Where's your self-righteous dignity? At this time, Nie Tian suddenly exerted force with his feet, and with a furious roar, Yang Sun's entire body sank into the ground. Yang Sun's eyes trembled. His eyes bulged out from the pressure, as if they were about to pop out of his eye sockets. His entire face was completely distorted and collapsed. It was extremely tragic. However, his consciousness was incomparably clear, allowing him to truly feel the humiliation at this moment. At some point, his gaze looked towards the 7 or 8 Wan Jian martial practitioners in the sky, as if seeking help. However, these people who were usually respectful to him and called him brothers were indifferent at this time. They had no intention of making a move at all. These Wan Jian martial practitioners were all Sage Realm swordsmen at the sword rhythm boundary. If they attacked together, Nie Tian would not be able to withstand it at all. However, they did not dare to make a move. On one hand, they were shocked by Nie Tian's strength. They felt that if they attacked alone, they could not defeat Nie Tian at all. On the other hand, more importantly, they felt that there must be an expert behind Nie Tian. Otherwise, Nie Tian would not dare to find Yang Sun so arrogantly. They even thought that Nie Tian might be a martial practitioner from some holy realm. Otherwise, his strength could not be so freakish. They absolutely did not believe that a realm martial practitioner could have such strength at such a young age. After considering all these factors, they did not dare to make a move. Yang Sun, let me ask you now, where are my friends? Nie Tianling asked coldly. He naturally did not forget that he had come here to find Imo, Qianjun, and Zhou Qiansheng. They're dead. Yang Sun felt slightly relieved. However, he still had a fierce expression on his face as he roared furiously. He had been humiliated by Nie Tian, but the latter still wanted to find out the whereabouts of Imo, Qianjun, and Zhou Qiansheng. Wishful thinking. You have so much backbone, huh? Nie Tian's eyes darkened. Cold light surged in his eyes as he said coldly, I want to see just how much backbone you have. After saying that, he willed the bone-eroding, soul-shackling chain to appear and pierce through Yang Sun's chest. Ah! The sudden pain caused Yang Sun to howl miserably. His shrill cry was incomparably tragic. The bone-eroding soul, shackling chain could corrode bones and refine soul power. It directly pierced through Yang Sun's chest and tore through his martial body, making him feel as if his body and soul were being torn apart. This kind of terrifying torture was absolutely not something an ordinary person could endure. Many of the female attendants and female swordsmen closed their eyes when they saw this scene. They did not dare to watch. They had never imagined that Nye Tian, who had just saved their lives, would have such a cruel side to him. Nye Tian, on the other hand, had a cold smile on his face. His eyes flashed with a cold light. Nye Tian would not think that a scumbag like Yang Sun would go overboard no matter what he did. Yang Sun, you still have one more chance to speak. Cherish it, Nye Tian said again. The murderous intent in his eyes was on the verge of bursting out. He was not threatening Yang Sun. He had already made up his mind to kill him. Regardless of whether Yang Sun revealed Mo Qianjun and Zhou Qiansheng's whereabouts, Nye Tian was going to kill him. Nye Tian would not be able to quell the anger in his heart if he did not kill such a scumbag. I'll speak. Yang Sun felt the bone-eroding, soul-shackling chain stop moving. The corners of his mouth twitched and his eyes started to tear up. He had really been beaten to tears by Nye Tian. They are in the secret chamber here. Yang Sun's eyes were trembling as he spoke with difficulty. What secret chamber? Nye Tian frowned and said in a cold tone. Right behind you. Yang Sun struggled to speak. Every word he said was very difficult. Oh, Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. He turned around and saw a hidden stone door behind him. It turned out that there was a secret chamber in this valley. Very good. Nye Tian Lung laughed. His eyes flickered with a cold light as he looked at Yang Sun and said, You are useless now. Die with your humiliation. After saying that, he suddenly lifted his foot. The power of his physical body instantly exploded. In the next moment, if his foot landed, Yang Sun would be crushed into a pile of minced meat. Don't kill him. However, at this moment, a low roar suddenly rang out in the air. After that, a terrifying sword intent appeared, piercing through the air with extreme sharpness. Lord Six Scott, the Wan Jian powerhouses in the sky reacted immediately. They looked at the void and saw a figure speeding towards them. It was the Sixth Guy. I must kill him. Nye Tian lifted his head and looked at the Sixth Guy. The corners of his mouth twitched, and he said in a cold tone. He lifted his foot and brought it down. Bang! As his foot landed, there was a muffled sound in the air. Suddenly, a tragic and bloody scene took place. The ground was covered in blood.